What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto is framed by Sakura? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. A soft ray of light crept in through a crack in the blinds. Ever so slowly, the light illuminated the contents of the room. A beige dresser, a bookshelf crammed with textbooks and scrolls, dark green bedding, a single picture in a frame on a nightstand, until finally the light shone across her face. A mess of tangled pink hair tossed and turned, as the girl who inhabited the room slowly stirred. Eventually, and with great distress, she forced open her eyes and the light reflected off jade as she forced herself to sit up. Sakura Haruno stretched her arms up over her head and groaned. Great, another night with barely any sleep, she thought to herself. She took a hair tie off of her wrist and quickly tied her shoulder-length hair behind her head before wiping the sleep out of her eyes. She wrestled with the cord that opened her blinds. After managing to open them, she was greeted by the sight of the village hidden in the leaves of her home. She took in a deep breath as she observed the civilians down below. So many smiling faces. She saw a little girl trip and fall before her younger brother rushed to her side to help her up. She watched as their mother walked over and picked up the child, and all three of them laughed. She let out a soft chuckle herself. We did it, we really did. All the fighting, all the struggle. This is why. This is what it led to. She turned her view upward toward the great stone faces of the Hokage monument. The war was over. It had been for 2 years. So many lives had been lost, and so many battles had been fought, but in the ashes rose a ninja village and a ninja world that was stronger and more united than ever. She remembered all the funerals and influx of patients at the hospital that came after the final battle. How difficult the rebuilding had been. Things had finally started to settle down. The village had completely recovered from the pain attack prior to the war, and had even started expanding. Above the great stone faces there were signs of a new part of Konoha that was taking shape. This part hardly resembled the village down below, as metal rods and beams represented the evolution of architecture. The homes and houses of the village she grew up in were being replaced with towering skyscrapers and luxury apartments. She understood that this was going to be the new business district of Konoha, but she was very glad that her line of work would ideally not take her there often. Still, she was grateful for the peace that allowed such a place to be a possibility in the first place. A peace that he brought about, she thought to herself. She leaned over and picked up the framed photograph she kept on her nightstand. She held it in her hand and looked down on it, and focused on the face of a dark-haired sulking man with his arms folded across his chest. But before long she found her gaze shifting to the blonde shinobi mimicking his stance on the right. She couldn't help a smile forming on her lips as she turned her view back towards the village. And our war is over too, she thought. They had done it. Against all odds they had managed to bring their friend home. They had brought Sasuke Uchiha back from the darkness that consumed him. It had almost cost them their lives. Hell, it almost cost everyone in the world their lives, but they had done it. If she was being honest with herself, she knew that he had really done it. She looked back to the blonde in the photograph. Naruto Uzumaki, her precious teammate, 1/3 of Team 7. The #1 hyperactive knucklehead ninja, dead last in his class. Now, the village hero. The ninja world's hero. He had defied everyone's expectations, including her own, and rose from nothing to the best of the best. He was famous throughout the world, the most likely candidate to replace her former sensei as the next Hokage, and most importantly, he was her best friend. Ever since he had come back from his 2-year training trip with Jiraiya, the two of them had become close. They were close before, but she knew she admonished and insulted him far more than she should have, and it took her a long time to get over the shame of some of the things she had said to him. She still wasn't over it, but she recognized that given the way every single person in the village treated him, she was not entirely to blame. Not that it stopped her from blaming herself, she did that quite enough. But it was after the war that the two of them had become inseparable. They had brought Sasuke back, but as soon as he received his prosthetic arm he set out on his own journey to atone for his sins. She remembered how he had wanted to live the rest of his life with one arm, before Naruto convinced him that the village's power would be significantly weakened if Sasuke had a handicap. Eventually he agreed and received his prosthetic. She also remembered him denying her the opportunity to join him on his journey. Before leaving he had tapped her on the forehead, just how his brother used to do to him, and told her he would be back eventually. But it was his final words as he walked the path out of the gates of the village that stuck with her. Besides, you're needed here, more than you know. And with that, he had left the village, but not before receiving his headband from his brother, agreeing to settle things between them when he returned. Those words stuck with her because she sensed a hidden meaning in his message, but to this day could not decipher what he meant. She knew her role as a medic was important, but she didn't think that was what Sasuke was talking about. She also remembered being significantly less sad than she was anticipating at the rejection. She knew, deep down in her heart, that Sasuke was not the one for her. And in the last 2 years, she had realized that she cared for him as a friend and a teammate, but some wounds couldn't heal. She couldn't act like he was the same Sasuke that he was before he left, and she couldn't ignore the fact that he had hurt so many. That he had hurt her. That he had hurt Naruto. She could forgive and move on, but she no longer was capable of feeling the same love for the Uchiha. Figuring it out had not been easy, but she had come to terms with and accepted her own feelings for a while now. Since the Uchiha left, again, Sakura and Naruto had become as thick as thieves. They trained together, ate meals together, hung out together. She even had a spare set of clothes at his place as she stayed at his apartment at least once a week. It was closer to the hospital. Ever since she took over as assistant head doctor, under the leadership of her mentor, the 5th Hokage, she sometimes had to be at the hospital at obscene hours in the morning, and staying 15 minutes closer to work made all the difference. On those nights, Naruto slept on the couch in the living room while she took the bed. She would have gladly taken the couch but he had insisted, and it was one of their few disagreements he had actually won. The two of them were as close as two people could be, and she wouldn't give that away for the world. Which is why the last 2 weeks had been really weird and, to her great surprise, sad for her. Kakashi had called them into his office 2 weeks ago to let them know that Sasuke had finished his journey of redemption and was coming home to stay in the village for the time being. She thought that Naruto would have been ecstatic to have his brother home, so she was surprised when he seemed almost sad to hear the news. "Naruto, what's wrong? I thought you would be over the moon to have him back," Kakashi had asked him. As quickly as it had appeared, the sad look on his face vanished. "Sorry Kakashi-sensei, I am. I just was thinking about how now I have to keep an eye on him again. I hope the bastard's less mopey than he was when he left." He plastered his signature grin on, but Sakura could tell something was wrong. However, she decided to ask him about it later. Unfortunately for her, later never came. Since that day, he had hardly seen her. They hadn't hung out alone once, and their only contact was when he was on an errand for Kakashi at the hospital. He had acted very strangely and the whole thing was bothering her. Then, when Sasuke returned a week ago, she assumed Naruto had put all of his time into making sure his friend was acclimated and helping him adjust. She understood that he was busy, but she would have liked for him to make more time for her. And it surprised her just how much she missed being with him. The feelings of dependence on him had been there for a while, she knew this, but she didn't think that him not being around would have such an effect on her. "Whatever, he is busy and it's not like he owes me anything," she thought to herself. "Besides, we have a mission Tota." Oh no, she broke herself out of her own thought and looked at the clock. 7:35, "Damn it, I am gonna be late," she yelled. She threw herself out of bed, jumped into her winter clothing as fast as she possibly could, and entered the living room ready to leave. Morning forehead, she was greeted to the sound of her best friend and roommate who was sipping tea at the small dining table next to the kitchen. Sakura clenched her fist as a vein popped in her temple. She was glad that she and Ino had decided to get an apartment together a year ago, and she loved the girl to death but was not in the mood for any of her comments this morning. "I told you to stop calling me that pig," she said, "but I'll deal with you later, I'm already late." And with that she grabbed a piece of fruit from a basket on the counter and opened the front door. She jumped onto the roof as the cold winter air slammed her in the face as she began to head towards the 3rd training grounds. Sakura jumped out of the trees and landed softly at the entrance to the training grounds. She looked at the scene unfolding in front of her and couldn't help but smile. The training field was divided in the middle by a small body of water. On the side of the entrance sat 16 young academy students, all of which seemed too excited to sit still. She clocked the fact that more than one of them was wearing orange, and felt slightly annoyed that her teammate had actually managed to make the color into a fashion trend. Behind the children stood a tall adult with his hair tied up above his head, and with a large scare spread horizontally across his face. He was the first to notice her arrival. "Sakura, it's good to see you, glad you could make it today," Iruka said as she took a place by his side. She smiled warmly at him and nodded her head. "Of course, sensei, glad I could help. With those two, I have a feeling I will be healing somebody rather quickly." She laughed and Iruka said something about how she was right, but also how he had a few young medics in his class that looked up to her and wanted to meet her. She nodded her head and smiled, before turning her attention to the other side of the river. Her heart sped up as she braced herself for the scene in front of her. Yet, at the same time, she was overjoyed that she had lived to see the day this could happen. Across the water stood two shinobi, staring intensely at each other. On the left stood a man with dark black hair covering one of his eyes and a frown etched upon his face. He was clad in all black, with a cape that covered his simple, black uniform underneath. He discarded his cape and the crest embroidered on the back of his shirt came into view. A crest he wore with more pride than almost anything else in his life. He exuded a calm, powerful presence that she could feel all the way from where she stood. While she was used to it, the Mont's energy never failed to send a chill down her spine, although not for the reasons it used to. The feeling vanished, however, as soon as she shifted her gaze to the man on the right. Naruto Uzumaki stood at full height with his hands crossed across his chest. He was focused, thinking of nothing else but the man who stood in front of him. In contrast though, his energy was warm and inviting, yet just as powerful. He stood confident and his eyes stated there was no way in hell he would lose, and he had the track record to back it up. He wore a black jacket with an orange zipper that went all the way up to the neckline, paired with his signature orange pants. On his arm he had a band with his own clan symbol on it. She remembered the fuss he had made when she took him shopping to buy his new jacket. He had complained the old one worked just fine, despite the face it was worn, tattered, and barely fit him after his latest growth spurt. It still surprised her he ended up being taller than she was by almost a foot. He had only conceded when she offered to buy him lunch if he just tried it for a few days, and he hadn't taken it off since. Suddenly, his focus was broken as he sensed her presence. He turned and his gaze met hers and a toothy grin spread across his face and his hand shot up and waved to her. "Sakura-chan," he yelled and started hopping up and down as if to get her attention. She closed her eyes and a vein popped in her forehead. "I can see you, you idiot. You better stay focused or you're gonna lose this time," she yelled back, and was amused at his defensive reaction. Some of the students laughed and she smiled at him. He knew he was being made fun of, but shook it off and turned back to Sasuke, who had a smug look on his face. "What are you looking at? You two are both so annoying," he said, before putting his hand on the handle of his katana. "You ready to get started?" "Almost. Just one more thing, put your headband on," Naruto said, as he adjusted his own headband and tightened it. Sasuke looked at him before smirking and reaching into his weapon pouch. "HMF," he said, as he tied the headband and used it to push his hair out of his face, revealing his Rinnegan eye that was previously covered. Sakura meanwhile, just sat there, smiling like an idiot. This is also what it was for, she thought before adjusting her own forehead protector and settling against a nearby tree to watch the match. "Alright you two," Iruka yelled. "I want a clean fight. Remember this is just a friendly match, please avoid anything that would permanently damage the field. No giant-tailed beast or Rinnegan attacks. Sakura is here to patch you up, but don't go too far. I will call when the match is over." Naruto and Sasuke didn't flinch. Iruka sighed and took a place leaning against a tree next to Sakura. "Whenever you are ready, begin." The atmosphere on the training field shifted instantly. The two comrades locked their gaze, and the temperature rose around them. Some of the students expressed their surprise when they could actually feel the pressure radiating from the other side of the field. Sakura and Iruka looked on in awe. No matter how many times she saw them clash, it never ceased to amaze her. In terms of sheer raw power, there was no matching those two, and she leaned further against the tree and braced herself for what was to come. Around the field, pebbles and small rocks began to shake and over in the air. The water in the pond changed from calm to violent and the leaves in the trees began to thrash wildly. Neither man appeared to even notice as they continued to lock on to their opponent. Then, as quickly as it had started, the commotion on the field stopped. The rocks settled down and there was a brief moment of total stillness before Sasuke Uchiha made his move. His hands were too fast for the untrained eye to see, but Sakura was able to catch him make a few hand seals at inhumane speed. Here we go, she thought to herself. Inferno style. Great fireball just to... Sasuke shouted and he breathed out a giant ball for red fire that was quickly coated in lines of black flames and sent it hurling towards Naruto. The grass it left in its wake was burned to a cinder and it came inches away from hitting its target. At the last minute, Naruto shot his hand out, and bright yellow-tailed beast chakra coated it, taking the form of a large claw-like hand. The fireball slammed into the chakra palm and hissed as it tried to continue on further to no avail. Naruto closed his palm and as if it were nothing extinguished the entire just you. Is that all you've got? He shouted out before realizing his opponent was no longer in front of him. He looked around him quickly before looking above, where he found Sasuke in the air with black lighting emitting from his hand. Onyx Chidori Senbon, he yelled as hundreds of tiny, razor-sharp lighting needles shot out toward the ground. Naruto didn't have time to react as dozens of Senbon pierced his arms and upper body. Sasuke landed behind him and slashed with his sword, aiming for the blonde's back. The blade connected, but as soon as it had the Naruto before him disappeared into a puff of smoke. Across the field, Sakura let out a sigh of relief as she watched the injured Naruto disappear. Sasuke looked around trying to locate his opponent. Not around, not above, then he must be. But before he could finish his thought the ground beneath him erupted as the real Naruto slammed his fist into Sasuke's chin, knocking him back and up with a powerful uppercut. The crowd of students went wild as Naruto's blow connected. Most of them hollered or cheered his name, but a few winced or cheered on Sasuke. Sakura was glad that the two figures were just as polarizing to the new generation as they had been in the old. Meanwhile, Sasuke had regained his footing. He wiped a small trail of blood off his lip before extending his left arm out in front of him. His Rinnegan eye glowed as he released his almighty push technique. Naruto recognized the stance and formed a very familiar hand seal. A dozen clones identical to their creator appeared in a cone formation behind Naruto. As Sasuke's attack pushed him back, his clones pushed him forward. The force intensified and clones began to disappear as they couldn't take the pressure. Just before the last two clones gave out the force stopped and a cloud of dust was left in the several yards Naruto had been pushed back. The children cheered and even Iruka let out a quick shout before realizing he was supposed to be unbiased in this fight. Sakura shot Iruka a knowing look, and was proud she had managed to keep a straight face. That, she thought, was impressive. Naruto's two remaining clones disappeared. Sasuke's window is 4 seconds before he can use his Rinnegan again. 1 second faster than Pain's attacks, he thought. He was still impressed his rival had managed to surpass the leader of Akatsuki's speed with just one eye. He smiled to himself. I've been looking for an opportunity to try this out. With his left hand, he started to form a ball of chakra that condensed and began spinning at extreme speeds. Rasengan, one of the children shouted out as a few more cheered on their favorite ninja. He coated his other hand with his tailed beast chakra mode, and reached into his weapon pouch. In the blink of an eye he threw a chakra-coated kunai at Sasuke. To any other ninja the speed of the attack would have proved too much, but Sasuke simply tilted his head as the weapon went flying past. 1 more second, Sasuke thought as he lifted his arm to ready another gravity attack. However, his eyes widened when his friend disappeared into a flash of orange and yellow before him. Sakura stood up from her leaning position, wide-eyed. Is that? But before she could finish her thought she saw Naruto reappear behind Sasuke just in time to catch the kunai in his free hand. In one movement he caught the weapon and twisted his body. His attack slammed into Sasuke's back. Or it would have, if the Uchiha had not covered himself in a ribcage made out of chakra at the last minute. Still, with the lack of time Sasuke was unable to fully power up his Susanoo, and the Rasengan proved enough to break through the chakra bone and send Sasuke flying forward a few feet. The crowd cheered and Naruto stood with his arm outstretched, a smirk look glued to his face. I can't believe he can use that Justu now. Iruka thought out loud before turning to Sakura. Did you know he could do that? Sakura shook her head. It bummed her out a bit that her closest comrade had a technique up his sleeve that she didn't know about. She quickly shook it off, however, that's just the way Naruto was. He was overzealous and unpredictable, and no one could hope to keep up with him at all times. Still, watching the technique in action, she couldn't help but see the resemblance between him and his father, the fourth Hokage. I wonder what his dad was like, she wondered, thinking back to when she had briefly met him during the war. She was broken out of her thoughts as she heard Iruka yell, "That's enough, you two," before disappearing to the other side of the field. Sasuke looked disappointed he wouldn't have a chance to retaliate, but understood this was just a match to excite the students and let out a sigh before meeting his brother in the middle of the field with Iruka. The two looked at each other and raised their hand with 2 fingers extended. Sakura swore she could cry seeing that. She began to walk towards her team to check the damage. Naruto was the first to notice her and quickly ran up to greet her. He stopped when he stood in front of her, and looked down at her with a glint in his eye. "How's that, Sakura-chan?" Sasuke can't even keep up anymore. He beamed from ear to ear before wincing in pain when Sakura punched him to the arm. "Be humble," she chastised him. "Don't get a big head just because you got a hit in. You know, if you kept going the fight wouldn't have been over." Naruto frowned and she let him sit in his misery for a second before adding, "Still, I had no idea you could do that, and that was pretty cool to watch." She giggled as she watched his expression change back to that of a 7-year-old boy in a matter of milliseconds. "How long have you been able to do that for?" Naruto and Sakura turned to see their third teammate walk over and join them, rubbing the part of his back that Naruto had hit. "About a week now. It's far from mastered and I can only do it with one kunai and a short distance, but it still comes in handy," Naruto replied. Sakura forced herself not to show any sign of disappointment. "Only a week, that explains why I didn't know about it. Go talk to your fans, they're waiting," Sasuke said as he pointed to a group of children that Iruka was desperately trying to keep under control. Naruto let out a relaxed sigh. He still wasn't used to the younger generation idolizing him this much, but he didn't mind it. It actually filled him with a great sense of pride. "I just have a few bruises on my arm. Sakura-chan, you can heal Sasuke first, I'll be right back," he said before turning to go inspire the youth of Konoha. Sakura watched as he began giving an impassioned speech to the students after he high-fived a few of them. She then concentrated chakra into her hands as they began to glow a soft green, and slowly the glow became more powerful. She signaled to Sasuke to turn around and he nodded and lifted up the back of his shirt. Sakura put her hands on the dark bruise that was forming where Naruto had landed his attack. Sasuke took a deep breath as the pain began to fade away. "So, how has it been since you got back? I've only seen you a few times," Sakura said, trying to break the awkward silence as her hands rested on his back. Sasuke waited a moment, making her question if he was even going to respond, before he spoke. "It's been okay. Not everyone has been as forgiving as you and Naruto have, but that's to be expected. I have to earn my place here now." He paused and looked over to Naruto, who was blocking punches as a few small shinobi in training attempted to land a hit. "But, it's peaceful," he finished. Sakura removed her hand and Sasuke readjusted his shirt. "Well, I am glad you're back. We all are. And those who aren't will come around eventually," she stated matter-of-factually. "Plus having that idiot around all the time must help a bit." She nodded at their blonde teammate. Sasuke looked back at her confused. "Actually, I haven't seen much of him since I returned. We have sparred one time before this and he helped me move some stuff into where I am staying, but other than that I assumed he was with you." He noticed as Sakura's eyes darkened a bit and she looked at the ground. "Oh," was all she could say. The dark-haired shinobi sighed and looked back over to his best friend and only remaining family. "Idiot, what the hell are you doing?" he thought to himself. He also thought about whether to say something to comfort Sakura, but realized anything he could mention would probably only make things worse. Comforting people was not one of his strengths. He sighed as stood up. "I have to meet with Kakashi. He wants to talk about possibly sending me on missions. I'll see you around. Thanks for that." He gestured to his injury and before Sakura could respond he disappeared in a blur. Sakura watched the place where he had been standing less than a second ago, and chuckled. For Sasuke, that was actually pretty talkative. "I think being home will be good for him," she thought before wincing at the other thing he had said. "But if Naruto isn't with him, why is he ignoring me?" As if on cue, the blonde in question appeared before her and smiled. "Sorry for the wait, Sakura-chan, those kids as energetic as me." He rubbed the back of his head and looked over one last time as Iruka waved, thanking both of them again before leading his class out of the training field. Naruto focused back to her. "Where's the other one? Don't tell me he left?" Sakura responded, "Yay. Said he had to meet up with Kakashi. Something about him getting registered to go on missions again. Now hold still, let me see your arm." He didn't move. "Sakura, you really don't have tea." She interrupted him by pulling him forward by the arm in question. So forcefully he stumbled a step before regaining his footing. "What am I going to do with you, idiot?" she said before rolling up his sleeve. Her eyes shot open when she saw burn marks on his arm. "Nothing crazy, but more than she was expecting. I guess you aren't as invincible as you think," she said before starting to work on his arm. He chucked and let her heal him. "I guess not." They sat in comfortable silence as Sakura finished healing his wound. When she was done, she took out a bandage from her weapon pouch and wrapped the burn. "That should do it, just put some ointment on it tonight. I'm sure I have left some at your place." She smiled at him and he smiled right back. She thought for a minute before asking, "I'm pretty hungry, wanna grab lunch?" "My treat." She watched the blonde got excited before his face broke into a frown. "Aw man, I want to Sakura-chan, but I forgot Konohamaru has something to show me." He said it was urgent. He rubbed the back of his head again. Sakura looked away for a second to regain her composure. "It's fine. Maybe tomorrow. I feel like I haven't seen you at all since Sasuke got back." At the mention of his name, Naruto got noticeably uncomfortable. "Yay, sure thing, Sakura-chan. I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for fixing me up." He gave her one last grin before disappearing into the trees leading back to the village. Sakura just stood there, now completely alone in the training grounds, confused and hurt. She had not only found out her best friend had been ignoring her, but he had done it again and blown her off. She wanted to punch him, but also wanted to just scream. What was even more confusing was the reaction he was getting out of her. "Pull yourself together, he doesn't owe you anything," she said out loud. As she began her walk back to the village, only one thought filled her mind. "Naruto, what is going on with you?" Naruto landed on the top of a rooftop near the entrance of the village. He was sweating and out of breath. He hadn't stopped moving since he left the training field. He slammed his fist into a nearby wall and leaned on it for support while clutching his chest with his other hand. Slowly, his breathing steadied as he forced himself to take several deep breaths. He looked down at the ground and let out a long sigh. "Damn it," he thought, "why does this have to be so hard? Why can't I just let it go and move on? Why does this have to hurt so much?" He turned around and leaned against the wall as he slowly slid down and rested his elbows on his knees. He looked up at the sky and couldn't stop a small tear from forming at the edge of his eye. He thought back to 2 years ago, right after the war ended. He remembered the feeling in his chest when Sakura Haruno had asked to join Sasuke Uchiha on his quest for redemption. The feeling of his heart breaking in two was not something that he would soon forget. On that day, the harsh reality hit him. He realized that Sakura still loved their other teammate, and even after everything that had happened her feelings hadn't wavered. He knew it was naive to hope otherwise, but seeing it in person was even more crushing than he could have imagined. On that day, Naruto had decided to bury all feelings he had for his pink-haired teammate. If she could be happy, even in the arms of another man, then he would step aside and not try to interfere. On that day, he had sworn off Sakura Haruno. Or so he thought. But even he never could have predicted how close the two of them would become in the years following the war. If he was being honest, he didn't even know how it happened. In the beginning, he just thought she was being friendly or being his teammate. As time went on though, he realized that their bond was growing even stronger than it had been before. She had become his confidant and his closest friend. He recalled all the memories that they had made over the past 2 years. All the punches he had received over stupid comments. Truth be told, he had learned to like her semi-regular beatings. It reminded him that he wasn't invisible and also kept his knucklehead side in check, relatively speaking. And slowly, the wall he had built after the war started to fall. He thought that having her at his side in any capacity was better than not. He thought that being her friend would be enough. Again, he was being naive. The last 2 weeks had been some of the worst in his life, and that was saying something considering his childhood. When his former sensei had informed him and Sakura of Sasuke's imminent return, he felt the joy of the last 2 years sucked away in an instant. He knew that once his rival returned, then that would be it. It would only be a matter of time before Sasuke and Sakura got together, and then she wouldn't need him anymore. In the back of his mind, he knew that this day would come. It didn't make actually going through it any easier. That night he had cried himself to sleep. He came to the decision yet again to step aside for the sake of her happiness. He had used any excuse to avoid her since that day. He had given them ample opportunity to pursue one another. He had done everything right in his opinion. So what surprised him the most was that nothing had happened. Contrary to popular belief, Naruto was not emotionally stunted. Sure, as a kid his mind had been pretty black and white, but after traveling with Jiraiya and going through everything he has with his fellow ninja, he had actually become pretty good at picking up on subtle emotional clues. So when he saw Sakura and Sasuke interact at the training field earlier that day, it had shocked him that it was clear nothing had happened between the two of them. That being said, it didn't stop him from feeling crushed as he watched her touch his back, even to heal him. He just didn't understand it, couldn't understand it. They had fought for so long. He had fought for so long to bring Sasuke back. And now that he was, Sakura was acting as if nothing had changed. And then there was the look she had given him when he tried again to give her space today. It was a look he had never seen on her before. She looked totally rejected. It was only for a second before she hid it and changed the subject, but he had seen it clear as day. It had only served to confuse him more. On top of everything, he was now concerned with being a poor friend to her. Yet despite this he couldn't bring himself to be alone with her. He was afraid her company would be too much to handle, and he might say something he would regret later. He knew he couldn't ignore her forever. He didn't want to ignore her at all, but he was so lost. He took a few more deep breaths before finally standing. He was broken out of his thoughts when he heard a familiar voice calling out to him. "There you are, boss, I have been looking everywhere for you," Konohamaru said as he landed on the roof in front of Naruto. "You didn't forget we were supposed to meet, did you?" "Sorry kid, I just got a little distracted," Naruto responded. Konohamaru could tell something was off. "Hey Naruto, are you okay?" he asked his blonde friend. Naruto shook his head and grinned at the boy. "I'm fine, just some stuff on my mind." "No big deal," he responded. Konohamaru could see he was lying, but decided not to push the subject and instead change it. "It's all good, come on, I have something I think you're gonna want to see." And with that he jumped down to the street level below and waved for Naruto to follow him. Naruto looked up at the sky once more and took a deep breath. "No use working myself up, I will figure it out eventually." And with that he joined his friend as they walked toward wherever Konohamaru was taking them. Naruto followed Konohamaru through the busy streets of the village. As they walked, he was greeted by many smiles and waves from his fellow villagers. He was even stopped by some children who asked for his autograph, which he gladly gave them. Konohamaru stood there with a smirk on his face. He was incredibly happy, and also a bit jealous that his rival and friend had become such a celebrity. Naruto never got a big head. He smiled and waved back at the villagers that took it all in stride. It had been 2 years since he had literally saved the world, and while it had taken some time he was now adjusted to the way he was treated. For the most part, he really liked it. It was the polar opposite of the way he was treated as a child, but he didn't harbor an ounce of resentment. Instead, he enjoyed the fact that he had earned the respect of every person who acknowledged him. That's not to say the constant attention wasn't sometimes taxing, especially his newfound popularity with the opposite. The number of gifts, naked photos, and flat-out marriage proposals he received on a weekly basis would make his master proud. Unlike his master, however, Naruto did his best to ignore this kind of attention. He wasn't in a place to think about any girl other than the one that took up most of his time, and he was certain that even if he were to ever date, it would not be a civilian woman who couldn't at least try to keep up with him and his lifestyle. The two shadow clone users made their way to a small wooden building that was on the outskirts of the village, right underneath Hokage Monument. Konohamaru took a key out of his pocket and unlocked the door. He turned on the light and the old bulbs made a faint buzzing noise as the contents of the structure were revealed. The walls were lined with piles of boxes, all filled and labeled as they extended all the way up to the ceiling of the building. "Hey kid, where are we?" Naruto asked as he looked around and took in his surroundings. This is the Sarutobi clan's storage facility. It's not much, but my family uses this place to keep things we don't need around the house. I think our family history is buried in here somewhere too. Konohamaru pointed to a specific box pile that was labeled Sarutobi History, as if to prove his point. I was searching around here for the first time in ages the other day and I found something that belongs to you. He continued before moving deeper into the maze of boxes. Me? Naruto asked in confusion as he followed his young friend and stopped when Konohamaru pulled out two medium-sized boxes and placed them on the floor in front of them. There are two things here. It looks like one of them my grandfather put aside for you. I didn't open it, but it's labeled childhood, so I am assuming it's old stuff he wanted you to have. Naruto's mouth opened slightly, but before he could respond, Konohamaru continued on. The other one. Naruto, the other one is from your parents. Naruto's eyes widened and he immediately picked up the box and read the label on the box. It read, "Things for Naruto, Minato, Kushina." His eyes began to water as he stared at the box in awe. This has been here the whole time, he said to himself more than anyone. I'm sorry boss, you know I would have given it to you sooner if I had known, but I just found it by chance, Konohamaru said apologetically. Naruto could tell he was sincerely worried he was at fault. It's okay kid, I have it now, that's what counts. Well, since you're here, wanna help me open this stuff? Konohamaru's mood instantly shifted as he sat down on the floor only to be joined by Naruto shortly after. Naruto decided to first open the box the third has left for him. He took a kunai out from his pouch and carefully sliced the tape that sealed the top of the box. He opened the lid, looked down, and smiled. He was greeted to the sight of various mementos from his childhood all the way up to the time the third Hokage has passed. He reached out and removed the items one by one. First he took out his old orange and blue jacket. He noticed all the holes and dirt on it, and he was reminded just how much he had trained in that outfit. It was nice to have a reminder that all the hard work wasn't all in his head. He folded the jacket neatly and placed it next to him. Konohamaru watched as Naruto went through the items one by one. His old goggles he would wear before he graduated the academy, his official genin photo, a rusty shuriken that he recognized as one of his first, his old sleeping cap, and an expired voucher for 10 free meals at Ichiraku's, to which Naruto was extremely excited about until he read the fine print. When he was finished, Naruto carefully placed the items back into the box and shut it. After a moment he looked at Konohamaru. Thank you for this, he said, his expression painfully serious. It's an honor to think your grandfather cared this much about me. I really didn't know that he did. Naruto looked back down at the box. He had always wondered why, if the third had known about his heritage, he didn't do more to help him. He now realized that the old Hokage had done everything he possibly could while preserving the peace in the village, and he was deeply grateful to know the man had spent as much time as he had thinking about him, even if he couldn't do more. No problem boss. You wanna open the other one or take it home? Naruto thought for a moment before looking back to his friend. No time like the present, right? He smiled and took hold of the remaining box. He was nervous to open it, but he steadied his resolve and slowly cut the tape and lifted the lid. He gasped as he looked inside to see the contents. The mere sight of things that were his parents brought out emotions he hadn't expected. The box had 4 items inside of it. Naruto pulled out the first one and held it in his hand. It was a frame that was divided into 3 sections. 2 smaller ones of the top half, and 1 larger one on the bottom half. On the top left was a photo of his father as a genin, and on the right was a matching photo of his mother. Naruto had never seen a picture of his parents so young. He couldn't believe how alike he and his father had looked as children. He looked back over to his mother and a bittersweet feeling struck his chest. She reminds me so much of her, he thought as his mind wandered to his pink-haired friend. He quickly forced himself to focus on the happy task at hand and looked to the bottom half of the frame. It was a photo of his father hugging his mother from behind, while she held her hands on her very pregnant stomach. The corners of Naruto's mouth curved slightly as a tear fell from his eye onto his mother's shoulder. We finally have a picture together. He wiped his eyes and apologized to his friend, who brushed it off and motioned for him to continue. The next item he pulled out was one of his father's famous Thunder God kunai knives. He was surprised to feel just how heavy the weapon was, as this was his first time holding it outside his tailed beast form. Underneath the kunai was a scroll. Naruto unraveled and read the first few lines intently as his eyes shot open. What is it? Konohamaru said, a little too excited for his own good. Naruto closed the scroll. It's instructions on how to master my father's technique. From the looks of it, it's incredibly thorough and fills in all the gaps I've been having while trying to learn it myself. Naruto responded. This is incredible. He spun the kunai around his finger before placing it next to the scroll and picture frame. Thanks, Dad. He reached into the box and gasped as he pulled out the final item. In his hands, he held a teal-green scarf, with white vertical stripes breaking up the pattern every few inches. He unwrapped the scarf and noticed that it was clearly hand-knit, yet incredibly well made. As he moved it, a small Polaroid photo dropped out and he caught it before it hit the ground. It was in much worse condition than the framed photo he had viewed earlier, but what he saw brought a new round of tears to his eyes. His mother was sitting in a chair in what he assumed was their home, knitting the scarf he currently held in his hand. On the back of the photo there were 3 handwritten words, "Happy Birthday Naruto." That did it. The combination of knowing he was holding in his hands something his mother made, with the fact that it was made just for him, was enough to push him over. He held his arm over his eyes as tear after tear started to flow down. Konohamaru watched as his hero and close friend broke down in front of him. He was about to say something when he had an idea. He got up, slowly took the scarf from his hands, and wrapped it around Naruto's neck. Naruto flinched at the contact and, upon realizing what his friend had done, smiled in his direction. They really loved you, boss, Konohamaru said as he patted Naruto on the back. Naruto took a deep breath and let out the words, "Yay, they really did." Before the tears returned, Naruto and Konohamaru lost track of time as they stayed there, not saying a word. Eventually, the two-leaf ninja left the storage house, Naruto carrying his newfound treasures with his friend following close behind. Thanks, kid. You have no idea how much this all means to me. Konohamaru slapped his mentor on the back and grinned. I'm just returning what's yours. The blonde was truly touched before he noticed how low the sun was in the sky. Crap, I'm supposed to meet with Kakashi-sensei. He said it was important, probably another mission. Oh man, I can't be late again. He quickly formed his signature hand sign and a single shadow clone appeared beside him. He handed the box to his clone, but not before taking his new scarf and wrapping it around his neck. You lose this, you're dead. Even for a clone. A bead of sweat formed on the clone's forehead as he nodded before disappearing in the direction of Naruto's home. Naruto thanks his friend again and turned to leave. Hey boss. Konohamaru shouted out and Naruto turned around. Good luck with whatever is bothering you. Naruto was surprised but shot his friend a thumbs up before jumping on the rooftops and heading for Hokage Tower. Sakura turned the key to her apartment and quickly shut the door behind her. It had begun snowing halfway through her shift and she was ill-prepared to say the least. She had managed to avoid most of the inclement weather by ducking from cover to cover, but for the last leg of her journey home she was unable to avoid the snow and was now substantially cold and wet. She took off her shoes and headed towards the bathroom, but not before she noticed Ino and Sai cuddled up on the couch. Hello Sakura, Sai said, being the first of the pair to notice her. Ino turned to look at her best friend and smiled. Long day? She asked. You have no idea, she responded before heading into the bathroom. Ino and Sai shared a sympathetic look at each other before returning to their previous activities. Sakura emerged from the bathroom a few minutes later, her hair wet and slicked back and a lime green towel around her chest. She looked over to the couch and noticed it was empty. She then heard Ino moan as a loud creaking noise came from her rival's room. She sighed and a vein popped in her forehead. Jesus pig, I'm happy you guys are together now, but it would be nice to not have to come home to every night, she thought to herself as she entered her room. She pulled out a pair of pink sweatpants and an oversized white shirt, and lazily flopped down onto her bed. She loved Sai, and it was actually her that suggested he make a move on Ino. She had noticed he acted slightly differently around her after they had come back from a mission together, and it turned out her instinct had been correct. The two had been dating for 2 months now and she never would have guessed how close the pair would become. She also didn't think that they would be this active, knowing Sai, she had assumed it would take Ino a little while to teach him basic intimacy, let alone for them to go all the way. Instead, she had found out Ino had broken the poor boy in 2 weeks' time, and now she was treated to a lovely private concert of her best friend getting pleasured on a near-nightly basis. It must be nice to be cared for like that, she thought, before her mind immediately shot to her blonde teammate. She shook her head to get the thoughts to go away. What's wrong with you? He ignores you for a few days and now you can't get him out of your head. Unfortunately for her, she had spent the better part of her shift trying to figure out why she was being ignored. After hours of deliberation, she hadn't been able to come up with a single reason. The only idea that popped into her head was, as childish as it sounded, that he no longer wanted to be her friend. However, she rapidly pushed that thought away. She knew it wasn't true, and she also didn't want to think about him not being around her for that reason. She groaned and grabbed a medical scroll she had been reading from her nightstand in order to distract herself. She had only been reading for 5 minutes when she heard a furious knocking at her front door. I'm coming, she yelled as the knocking continues. She put down her scroll and made her way to the source of the commotion. She noticed Ino's door was still shut, and took a deep breath before opening the door. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw Naruto standing there, his arms on his knees and bent over as he was trying to catch his breath. She noticed he was wearing a green scarf that she had never seen before. Naruto, what are you doing here? Is everything okay? Sakura-chan, he interrupted as he stood up straight and gave her one of the biggest grins that she had ever seen in her life. Sakura-chan, I am going to be Hokage. Sakura-chan, I am going to be Hokage. Sakura blinked 3 times as she started into her blonde friend's cerulean eyes. She was happy to see him, yet at the same time annoyed that he chose late at night after one of her long shifts to do pop-in. Her trademark vein appears on her temple and she closed her eyes in frustration. Naruto, we all know you're going to be Hokage one day, you don't need to bang my door down just to tell me that again. Naruto didn't break his eye contact with her and his expression turned incredibly serious. It got Sakura's full attention and she couldn't help but notice the small butterflies that fluttered in her chest. No, Sakura-chan, I am going to be the Hokage. As in, officially. Like the next one. I just met Kakashi-sensei and he gave me the news. It was decided on last week but I just found out. He watched as her eyes widened and the gears began to turn in her head. She took a small sharp breath before putting on the warmest smile Naruto had ever seen her give him. It melted his heart on the spot. Naruto, she shouted in sheer excitement. Before she realized what she was doing she jumped onto her blonde friend, wrapping her arms around his neck. The force was enough to knock them both off their feet. Naruto landed on his back with Sakura on top of him, straddling him with her arms still locked around him. It only took a few seconds for both of them to realize the position they were in. Sakura was on top of him, their faces just inches apart. The butterflies in her stomach exploded. Both shinobi blushed a dark shade of red and Sakura quickly got off of him. She shook the snow off her pants and tried to compose herself as best she could. Oh my god, I'm so sorry, she said as she offered her hand to help Naruto up. He just laid there, his mind fried at the sudden closeness he had shared with her before he too brushed it off and accepted her hand. No worries. Sakura couldn't stop grinning his way as she shouted again. You're going to be Ho. In a blur of orange and yellow Naruto quickly placed his hand over her mouth as she screamed into his palm. She froze and his eyes shot open at the sudden contact. In the last 2 minutes they had been physically closer than she ever remembered them being. He pulled away when she finished making sound. Sorry Sakura-chan, it's still classified and no one is supposed to know. He pointed a finger towards Ino's bedroom in what he thought was a sly manner. I'm not supposed to tell anyone yet but... His voice trailed off as if he was thinking if he wanted to continue speaking. My body just took over and I came here. You were the only person I had to tell. Sakura mouthed a silent, oh, before turning her head towards Ino's room. She knew that there was no way in hell the pig would hear anything as she was far too preoccupied, but decided Naruto didn't need to know that. Instead, she turned back to him. Give me 5 minutes. We're going for a walk. Naruto was about to tell her they didn't have to before she shut the door in his face, leaving him no choice but to wait for her. While he waited, he touched the back of his neck. He could still feel where she had wrapped her arms around him. She's never done that before. He thought as a blush covered his face. He chalked it up to her being excited and decided to let it go. After a few minutes of waiting Sakura re-emerged in her usual attire, and her red coat and winter boots. She looked adorable, he thought, before Sakura stepped outside and locked the door behind her. So, where do you want to go? He asked. She shrugged and passed him as she made her way to the street. Let's just see where the wind takes us. She turned to face him and he chuckled before joining her at her side. The pair began to walk north from Sakura's apartment. It had gotten colder since Sakura got home, but the snow had let up a bit. What was originally a powerful storm had turned into a picturesque light shower of white. The street lights reflected on the falling flakes as the two ninja walked in comfortable silence for a few blocks. Sakura looked over at the blonde boy beside her. She knew he was waiting until they found a quiet place to stop before sharing all the details of his Hokage appointment, but that didn't mean she couldn't talk to her friend. Hey Naruto, I've never seen you wear that before. She nodded to his new scarf. It suits you. Naruto beamed in her direction as he softly touched the fabric with his unbandaged hand. It was my mom's Sakura-chan. Sakura stopped walking and looked at him. Wait, what? Naruto answered before she had time to finish. Konohamaru found a box of stuff that my parents left for me. It was supposed to be for when I was born, I guess, but he just found it today. There was some really incredible stuff in there. She studied her friend as he continued on to tell her the contents of the box, as well as of the box left to him by the third Hokage. I can't believe that had been there all this time. Well, I'm happy it finally surfaced. She looked away from him and said a little quieter than she meant to, plus, you look good in it. The compliment took Naruto off guard, but after a moment he smiled for the umpteenth time that night. Thanks Sakura-chan. It's nice to have an actual gift from my parents. A thought crossed his mind as he realized he should return the compliment. You look nice too, he said before turning away from her so she couldn't see his facial expression. Sakura in turn followed his lead to look away. Idiot, she said under her breath as she smiled, but he winced a bit when he heard it. They continued to walk in silence until they found themselves in front of Hokage Mansion. Sakura smirked at Naruto. This private enough? She asked as she walked to the open area right outside the Ninja Academy portion of the building. She hadn't meant anything by her words, but they were enough to fill Naruto's head with a couple different scenarios he would rather she be asking him that question in. Regardless, he followed her lead. This really takes me back, Sakura said as they entered the courtyard of the Ninja Academy. Naruto walked behind her and looked around, feeling incredibly nostalgic. The old academy had been destroyed in Pain's attack on the village, but because it was attached to Hokage Mansion, the new one built in its place was almost identical. He noticed a single swing, hanging by two pieces of rope from a nearby tree. It was his swing, and the only thing to miraculously survive the decimation. He remembered all the misery he had to endure on that swing, watching his classmates play and make friends while he was ostracized and ignored. None of that mattered now, he thought. He was broken out of his thought when his pink-haired companion brushed off the swing in question and sat down. She began to sway gently, and when she made eye contact with him his breath caught in his throat. Okay, spill. He found a place beside her and put his hands in his pockets. He didn't like talking about his achievements, even if this one was the biggest one of his life to date. Well, after the kid gave me the gifts from my parents, I met up with Kakashi-sensei. He had mentioned he had something important to talk to me about, but I just assumed his was another mission. But when I walked into his office he was there, and so was Ba-chan, and Shizune and Shikamaru, and the village elders. Sakura nodded her head as she intently listened to hear him. I was confused at first, but Kakashi told me to sit down. He told me that it had been in the works for a while, but as of today I was officially approved as the 7th Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village. He smiled sheepishly down at her and rubbed the back of his head. But it's far from happening. I still have to reach Junin rank, which will probably take another year, then I have to train under Kakashi-sensei for at least a few months, probably longer. But the old man isn't exactly trying to hold on to the position. So when he retires in the next few years, then it's my turn. Sakura just stared at the face of the boy she had known most of her life. An influx of emotions ran through her body all at the same time. This man had fought so hard for everything that he had achieved, and finally his biggest dream was coming true. She tried to say something but couldn't do anything but look at him. Something in her was screaming, but she didn't know what it was or what it wanted her to do. So she just kept looking at him. Naruto on the other hand looked back, a little concerned for his now mute teammate. He was about to break the silence when Sakura got up from the swing and extended her hand out in the most formal manner she could. Congratulations, Lord Hokage, she said as she softly smiled at her best friend. Naruto looked down at her, as his emotions tried to get the better of him. He wanted nothing more than to be with her, alone, like this, for all of time. He took her hand and held it as tight as he could. Thank you very much, Lady Sakura. To his surprise, she didn't let go. She just kept looking into his eyes. He could feel his heart rate speed up as his lips suddenly dry out. I'm so incredibly proud of you, Naruto. She finally managed to get out. Her heart was beating just as fast as his. Nobody deserves this more than you do. She was about to let go, when something inside her decided she wasn't ready for the contact to be over. So instead, she dragged him with her as she sat back down on the swing. He asked her what she was doing as he landed behind her, catching his balance. Sakura didn't know what had come over her, but she wasn't in control over her actions anymore. So she did the first thing that came to mind. Your first act of service to the public is to push this helpless kunoichi on this swing. She gave him a smirk and wiggled her eyebrows before she turned away from him. It was a good thing too, because otherwise she would have seen his jaw drop. He wasn't used to Sakura being this playful, he thought. He couldn't help but want to see more of it. He did what he was asked, and softly placed his palms on her back. He had to stop himself from breathing heavy when he felt her slender form in his hands. He gently pushed and watched as she swung up and right back down into his palm. I know you can do better than that, she teased. Not being one to back down from a challenge, Naruto pushed her significantly harder and watched as she swung fast several feet in the air. She laughed, and Naruto swore he could die happy. He had just been told he was fulfilling his lifelong dream, but he was afraid this might be the best part of his day. Sakura let Naruto push her for a few more minutes, or maybe it was a few more hours. If she was being honest, she had completely lost track of time. When he gave her an extra hard push, she jumped off the swing as it reached its highest point, and landed gracefully on the ground a few feet away. She turned to face him and grinned before walking in his direction. Your turn. Naruto froze and avoided her gaze. She picked up on the subtle change and continued to walk toward him. Naruto, is everything okay? Everything is fine, Sakura-chan. He finally looked back at her. It's just that, well, no one's ever pushed me on a swing before. He let out an awkward laugh when he saw Sakura's eyes widen. She was in shock. She knew he had a rough childhood, but she sometimes forgot just how bad he had it. Just how much did he have to endure, she thought before looking back at him and motioning for him to sit. She walked behind him and put her hands on his upper back. The butterflies in her stomach returned, much to her dismay, when she felt the hard muscles of his shoulders against her palm. Relax, this is Naruto, it's just Naruto. He turned back at her and grinned his signature grin, and she immediately felt at ease. She pushed her friend and watched as joy filled his eyes when he swung up and back down. He let out a deep laugh, and she smiled at his reaction. It was nice to know even though he had changed so much, the hyperactive child was still hiding beneath the surface. She decided to up the game a bit, and focused chakra into her hands. The next push sent him flying as his eyes opened wide. The swing went flying through the air, and Naruto lost his grip on it as the top. He was sent tumbling into the fresh snow a few feet away from her, and landed flat on his face. The snow was deep enough that his head and neck were submerged entirely, and the image made Sakura cackle like a madman. Naruto removed himself from the snow, and shook his head in order to get the remaining liquid off his hair. He saw Sakura wiping a tear from her eye and he joined in her laughter. The two stood there, laughing hysterically, until eventually they managed to calm down. Silence filled the air, and Naruto picked up on a tension that hadn't been there before. Naruto? He heard her ask softly, as if the words she were about to say would break her. Why have you been ignoring me? Time stood still for him, as the joy from the last hour was replaced by panic and guilt. He didn't mean to lie to her, but the words came out before he could stop himself. Sakura-chan, what are you talking about? I haven't been ignoring you. I've just been so busy the last few weeks, what with helping Sasuke move back and get settled, plus my missions, and I had to clean my house, so that took longer than I thought. Naruto, don't lie to me. She cut him off. I already talked to Sasuke-ku. I already talked to Sasuke, and he told me you two had barely spent any time together. He assumed you were with me. And when I saw you at the hospital last week, you acted like I didn't exist. She paused and looked at the ground as her palms grabbed the bottom of her coat. If I did something wrong, just tell me so I can apologize. No. The tone and volume of Naruto's voice startled her, and she looked up to see him looking at her with an intense focus she rarely saw when he wasn't on the battlefield. He took a few steps closer to her, until he was right in front of her looking down. Sakura-chan, I am really sorry. The truth is I was avoiding you. You didn't do anything wrong. It's just. He looked away and she saw the determination in his eyes shift to weakness and vulnerability. It's just I was trying to give you and Sasuke space. I thought now that he's back you two would, want time to yourselves. I didn't want to get in the way. His fists clenched at his side and he continued to avoid her gaze. Sakura was stunned. It had never occurred to her that he could be avoiding her for such a selfless reason. It also never occurred to her that she had never talked to her best friend about where she stood with their third teammate. She stood silent for a moment. What would he think if he knew she was over the man they had spent the better part of their ninja careers pursuing? Regardless, she had to get it out. Now, this was Naruto. For better or worse, he wouldn't hold a grudge against her. Naruto, sit, she commanded, and he appeared startled, before following her order and switching spots with her to sit back down on the swing. I need to tell you something. And I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, but you should know. She took a deep breath and steadied her resolve. There isn't anything between Sasuke and I. He was my first love, and I still consider him a precious comrade. But after everything we went through to bring him back, I am not capable of being with him, even if he wanted to. Which, by the way, he very clearly does not. Sakura felt hidden emotions bubbling to surface as she realized she had never actually said the next part out loud. I saw how much he hurt people. How willing he was to hurt me, and how capable he was of hurting you. I know that isn't who he is, and I have forgiven him for all those things, but... She paused and looked into Naruto's ocean blue eyes again. I realized he isn't the man for me. When she was finished, she took a step back, and wiped away a tear she didn't realize was falling from her eye. I'm sorry I made you carry the weight of bringing him home just for me, but I'm just not as strong as you. I can't just pretend things are the same, and I can't be with someone I don't love anymore. I am so sorry. By the time she was finished, tears were freely falling down her cheek. Naruto sat on the swing. A million different emotions and thoughts were running through his mind. He couldn't stop the river of questions flowing. She doesn't love him anymore? How can that be? We worked so hard for so long. How can she cast everything aside just like that? Wait, why am I angry? I shouldn't be angry. This is great. This is the best news I have heard all day. Well, besides becoming Hokage and everything. No, calm down, Naruto. Just because she doesn't love him doesn't mean she can love you. Don't let your mind go there, it will only be more painful. But oh my god, His mile-a-minute thought process was interrupted when he saw she was crying. As if on instinct, he stood up from his swing and used his thumb to wipe away one of her tears. Sakura froze when she felt the contact, and looked up to not anger, but care and concern in his blue eyes. Don't cry, Sakura-chan, please don't cry. It's okay. I didn't know you felt that way. I'm so sorry I ignored you. I should have just talked to you like an adult. But I'm an idiot, remember? He smiled down and the pinkette couldn't help but laugh. You're not mad? She asked, regaining some of her composure. I'll admit I'm surprised, but no, I'm not mad. He smiled down at her. If anything, I'm relieved. I really didn't want to have a pink-haired Uchiha running around the village for the rest of my life. She laughed and wiped some more tears from her eyes before he continued. Besides, I didn't just bring him back for you, you know that. He's my brother, I wasn't planning on letting him go that easy. She knew it was true, but hearing it from his mouth she felt a wave of relief wash over her. This man could find the bright side of any situation. Despite how dense he was at times, right now he had said exactly what she needed to hear. She found herself at a loss for words for what felt like the 100th time that night, so she said nothing. Instead, she continued to stare deep into Naruto's. They were having a conversation, but neither knew what they needed to say. All they did know was they didn't want to look away. Sakura was about to say something, but a loud shrill voice suddenly screamed inside her head. Sakura Haruno, where the hell are you? Are you okay? I've been worried sick. Sakura flinched, put her hands on her temples as she heard her blonde roommate and rival screaming in her head with her mind transfer jutsu. She turned her head back to a confused Naruto who cocked his head and looked at her. Sorry Naruto, that's Ino. It's getting late, and the snow is picking up again. I should probably get home, she said before internally screaming at Ino that she would be back soon. Right. No problem, Sakura-chan. Thanks for letting me interrupt your night, he said sheepishly and rubbed the back of his neck. Sakura smiled and gave him a soft punch on the shoulder. Congratulations on your appointment, Naruto. I really am proud of you. Naruto blushed and gave Sakura one last grin before he watched her head out towards the gate. Right before she disappeared from sight, he remembered something and yelled after her. Sakura-chan, wait, can we still get lunch tomorrow? It surprised him how nervous he was to ask that question. However, as soon as she smiled back, his anxiety vanished. She nodded her head before jumping onto the rooftops, leaving the blonde ninja alone in the courtyard with his thoughts. Naruto slammed his apartment door behind him and quickly removed his soaking wet shinobi sandals and black jacket. He took extra care to hang up his mother's scarf before making his way to the bathroom. Quickly, he turned the water on as hot as it could go, then removed the remainder of his clothing and stepped in. A groan escaped his lips and the hot water drenched his hair and ran down his back. His head rested on his forearm against the wall as he tried to shake the image of Sakura out of his head. He had to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. Earlier that day he had been declared as 7th Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village. It would be quite a while before he actually sat in the Hokage's office and assumed the position, but he couldn't care less. For all intent and purposes, he had accomplished his lifelong dream. Now all he had to do was wait and let the future play out. That wasn't even close to the main thing on his mind. He tilted his head back and let the water slam against his closed eyes. The second Kakashi had released him, his body had taken over. Before he knew it, he had landed at her front door. He hadn't meant to do it, and the journey there was a blur in his mind. The only thing that remained clear was that she was the only person he could imagine sharing the news with first. In that instant, he had forgotten about all his efforts to distance himself and only wanted to see his best friend. He could have never guessed where the night would end up. It didn't surprise him that Sakura was as excited as she was, that part he had expected. Everything else that happened, however, was a total curveball for him. Her falling on top of him, his hand on her lips, the walk, sharing his family's memento with her, telling her about how it happened, pushing her on the swing, feeling her hands on his back, her confession. His fist tightened and he began furiously scrubbing his skin with soap. Her confession. Could she really be over Sasuke? Just like that? It would explain why nothing had happened since the Uchiha returned. Then again, he couldn't help but wonder if Sasuke instigated something, would she reciprocate? So many questions popped into his mind, and he had answers to none of them. And then there was that look. That damn look. All Naruto could think was that he wanted to see it again. After all their years together, Naruto thought that he has seen every one of Sakura's expressions. Yet, this one was new. She looked almost wanting. Almost desperate? He thought to himself. It had to be his imagination. There was no way Sakura Haruno was looking at him with any kind of desire. He pushed the thought out of his head. Damn it, he said softly as a tear formed in the corner of his eye. I was so close to moving on, and then she drags me right back in. And I let her. I practically begged her to. It took so little. His mind shot back to the fateful encounter in the Land of Iron. He remembered his heart tearing in two when she tried to fake her feelings for him. He hadn't been able to sleep for a week after that, and even now the wound hurt like hell. I'm so damn weak, he mumbled into his forearm. He was jolted out of his thoughts when he felt the water turn cold against his neck. Letting out a soft sigh, he turned the water off and grabbed a towel hanging on the back of the door. He dried his golden hair, rubbed the rest of the water off of his body, and headed into his bedroom. The bed creaked when he flopped down on it. Groaning one last time, he slammed the lights off and buried his head in his pillow. Nothing was going to get solved tonight, so he decided to force himself to bed. Or at least he tried to for a solid 5 minutes before letting out a guttural scream and throwing his pillow against the window. He sat upright in his bed, crossed his legs, and cleared his mind. He needed to talk to someone, and there was only one person he could think of that he currently had access to. Hey, Kurama, you awake? Get up, you lazy fox, I need to talk. With that, Naruto disappeared into the recesses of his own mind to speak with the demon fox that called his body home. Sakura sat across from her best friend, rival, and newly turned roommate at a local tea shop close to their apartment. The owner had migrated to the Hidden Leaf from the Hidden Cloud after the war. The two roommates had immediately fallen in love with the foreign decor and friendly service that the quaint tea shop emitted. Her cheek rested on her hand as she played with the straw sticking out of her drink. She had gone right to sleep when she got home last night, much to Ino's dismay. Her best friend had hounded her for details about where she had been, and when she noticed the blush and embarrassment she had almost looked into her memories to find out what was up. Sakura finally managed to fend her off by promising they could get breakfast before her shift at the hospital. Not that she minded, she loved spending time with Ino, and she desperately needed to unload about the emotions she couldn't seem to shake. "You look rested." Sakura looked up as her friend gave her a genuine smile. "I haven't seen you look this alive in a while." Sakura returned the expression. It was true. For the past 2 weeks Sakura knew she hadn't been sleeping well. A blush crossed her face as she thought of the reason she had slept so soundly. Naruto. Entirely Naruto. The sheer relief of having contact with him again, combined with getting emotions she hadn't realized she had been holding in for a long time off her chest, was enough to totally knock her out. She thought about the night before. She couldn't get the feeling of his hands on her back to go away, and her cheek still felt where his thumb had wiped away her tears. She had felt so safe with him, and all he had done was tell her she was okay. "So, are you going to tell me what happened or am I gonna have to pry it out of you?" Sakura shuddered at her friend's words. She knew Ino was entirely capable and didn't want to test her friend. She sighed and looked up at her friend. "I was with Naruto. Big surprise there, but a little late to be hanging out with your boyfriend on a school night, isn't it?" Ino teased and shot out her tongue, before seeing her friend blush and avoid her gaze again. Ino suddenly dropped the Joker act. She could tell this was gonna be a serious conversation. "What happened?" "Well, he had some big news he wanted to share." Sakura caught herself before continuing. Naruto had asked her to keep his Hokage appointment a secret and she didn't plan on breaking her word. "About the timeline of his promotion to Junin. It's happening faster than expected and he was really excited and wanted to tell me." Ino raised an eyebrow at her friend. "That it?" she asked before taking a sip of her tea. "No, pig, that's not it. We decided to go for a walk and ended up at the academy. We sat in the courtyard for a while and talked, and..." She paused for a second before letting out a deep breath. She knew that if she didn't give her friend the whole story, any advice she would receive wouldn't do her any good. "Can I start over?" she asked, and her friend smiled and nodded. Sakura told Ino everything, albeit still leaving out the news about Naruto's appointment. She recounted how she had fallen on top of him, their encounter on the swing, and her telling him her feelings about Sasuke. She explained to her friend the butterflies that she had been getting in her stomach every time they were close, and how sad she had been when he had ignored her for the last 2 weeks. By the end, Sakura was fighting back tears as she finished filling her friend in. Ino might be loud and abrasive at times, but she was also an incredible listener. She nodded and commented on everything Sakura said, asking questions, which the pinkette answered to the best of her ability. When Sakura finished her story, Ino sat in silence for a few moments, taking in what her friend had told her. Finally, she looked back to Sakura and started laughing hysterically, to the point where she almost fell out of her chair. "What the hell is so funny, pig?" A shocked Sakura reached across the table and grabbed Ino by her collar. Ino kept laughing until she finally was able to calm herself down. "You are, both of you." She wiped her eyes and took a giant swig of her drink in order to regain her composure. "You are both so blind to the situation that you can't see what's right in front of you. Ino, what are you trying to saw? Sakura, you love Naruto, don't you?" Time stood still for Sakura. Her eyes widened and her breath got caught in her throat. The straw she was playing with fell back into her drink as her arms went numb at her sides. Ahe stared dumbfounded straight ahead, no longer focusing on the blonde in front of her. She tried to say something, but couldn't bring herself to make any sound. Ino held back another fit of laughter as she watched her best friend short-circuit in front of her. After waiting a minute for her friend to respond, she continued on. "Don't try to hide it from me, forehead, I know you better than that. I understand you're confused, but everyone else has seen the signs for a while. The way you two hang out, the looks you give him when he isn't watching. The annoying way he answers your every beck and call. Blah." She stuck out her tongue and made a gagging motion. It's nauseating really, but it's also kind of adorable. The realization hit her harder than one of her mentor's punches. Sakura's jaw hung open as she finally managed to pull herself together. I love Naruto? You do. Don't beat yourself up over it too much, it was only a matter of time. I mean, he is the one who has been with you from the beginning. He's always been by your side. Ino was about to continue when she noticed tears silently falling from her best friend's face. Sakura, don't cry, this is a good thing. How is this a good thing? She screamed at her best friend, getting the attention of the other two customers in the tea shop. I can't love him, I can't even like him. I just can't. I have put him through so much, I have ignored his feelings for years. The tears continued to fall down Sakura's face and she didn't stop them. I hurt him, I broke his heart, and now, I'm supposed to expect him to just forgive me. That's not how this works, Ino. I don't get a happy ending with him. He deserves so much better than me. After a few minutes of crying, and having Ino come over to rub her back, Sakura managed to calm down. She wiped the tears from her eyes but continued to stare down when her friend returned to her seat. Feel any better? Sakura nodded her head slightly when Ino's hand reached out and grabbed her own. Sakura, I get how you are feeling. A lot of what you said is valid. But the reality is, you don't get to decide what he deserves, he does. I'm not pretending to know what goes on in that knucklehead's brain, but I do know there is a reason that he isn't with any of those annoying fangirls, or even with Hinata. The name made Sakura wince as a fresh set of tears threatened to take hold. She had been trying her best to ignore the thought of Hinata. She was keenly aware of the Hyuga's feelings towards Naruto, but at the time hadn't even acknowledged her own. Now that she was starting to, the last thing she needed was to feel even guiltier. All I am saying is don't ignore your heart. I don't know what that reason is, but if I was a betting girl I would bet it was you. She gave her friend a warm hug which she gladly returned, thanking her for the support. After a few more minutes of calming down, Sakura took a look at the clock on the wall. It read 7:45. I have to go. My shift starts in 10 minutes, and I think I am supposed to meet Naruto for lunch. Just what I need. She mumbled the last part under her breath. Thanks again, Ino. No problem, forehead. Don't stress too much. Everything will work itself out eventually. And if it doesn't, you can always join me and sigh for some fun. Sakura rolled her eyes before leaving enough money for her drink plus tip. She smiled one more time at Ino before headed to the hospital. Sakura stretched her arms over her head as she exited Konoha Hospital. She shivered as the cold air blasted her face, and a strong gust of wind pushed the hood of her coat off her head. It wasn't snowing but was still cold enough to knock out any post-shift fatigue she was feeling. She had only worked a short shift and was glad to have the rest of the day and night off to get some much-needed rest. Sakura had to stifle a laugh when she saw him. It wasn't how she expected to react after her talk with Ino, and she was grateful for that. Granted, she did clock the lump in her throat that hadn't been there previously, but the sight in front of her proved distracting enough for her to ignore it. There he was, leaning against one of the pillars of the hospital gate, one leg on the ground and one leg raised to support himself. His arms were folded across his chest, and his head was tilted down. His eyes were closed and the tiniest line of drool escaped his parted lips. Naruto had fallen asleep standing up. She walked up to him, and ever so gently pushed on his shoulder. It wasn't much, but given that he was completely knocked out it made him lose his balance and land on the ground with a loud thud. His eyes shot open and he immediately jumped up into a battle stance. He looked around rapidly in every direction. Who, what, when, where, how? He said before his eyes finally found the laughing pink-haired woman staring back at him. He pouted in her direction, which only caused her to laugh more. Very funny, Sakura-chan. I couldn't help it, you gave me the perfect opportunity. She smirked at him and began to walk. He quickly fell into line next to her and the pair began to walk. Naruto had his hands behind his head in his usual stance, and Sakura pushed her hands into her pockets trying to keep warm. She had to fight the butterflies that were threatening to explode out of her stomach when he smiled in her direction. Long day? She asked. It was rare for Naruto to be tired, and she was a little more concerned than she cared to admit. Yay. Truth be told, I didn't sleep that great last night. He shrugged and continued walking. Sorry about that, I didn't mean to keep you out past your bedtime, my lord. She winked in his direction and he let out a deep laugh which made her heart skip a beat. She loved making him laugh, and hadn't realized it until that moment. When did messing with him become so second nature? When did they become so comfortable around each other? Now that she thought about it, she guessed it really was a gradual thing after the war ended. It takes two to tango, my lady. He returned her expression before blushing a bit and breaking eye contact. Sakura didn't notice as she was entirely focused on maintaining her own composure. Is Ichiraku's okay? He asked, and a bead of sweat appeared on his forehead. Sakura giggled. She knew it was coming, but it was still nice of him to ask. There was a day when he would have just dragged her there, but it was good to see he had grown up a bit. That actually works. I haven't been feeling fat enough lately anyway. Naruto yelled something about ramen being the only necessary food group and Sakura broke out laughing. The two continued walking to his favorite place, making small talk. Naruto got caught up on her last 2 weeks at work, and she learned about some of the specifics for his accelerated Junin training. Sakura didn't notice Naruto sneaking glances at her whenever she wasn't looking. The entire time, Sakura could feel her heart in her chest. It's Naruto, it's just Naruto. Don't do anything stupid, Sakura. She repeated these words in her head like a mantra. So much so she didn't realize they had arrived at their destination until Naruto lifted the flaps that served as a door to the ramen bar. He ushered her inside. Both of their jaws dropped to the floor when they saw an ever-stoic Sasuke Uchiha sitting alone at the ramen bar. He was softly blowing on his noodles and his mouth was open, ready to take a bite, when he noticed his two teammates. He blinked 3 times before slowly putting the noodles into his mouth. Naruto and Sakura stood frozen, as they watched their friend realize he had been caught red-handed eating at Ichiraku's by himself. Finally, they both broke out laughing before taking a seat beside him. I thought you hated this place, Sasuke? Sakura teased before ordering her usual from the old man behind the counter. Sasuke shrugged. It was close by. I haven't gotten groceries for my place yet. It's his fault. Sasuke pointed to Naruto with his chopsticks before continuing to eat his meal. Naruto, on the other hand, was internally screaming. Oh come on, he thought. This was supposed to be my time with her, and he had to show up. Just great. I am absolutely going to kick his ass later. However, he was able to force a grin onto his face and struck up a conversation with his two teammates. Even if the situation wasn't ideal, he was glad that all 3 of them could spend time and eat together. It wasn't lost on him how long he had dreamed for this day. The team was interrupted when the flaps of the ramen stand opened again. This time it was Sakura's turn to curse internally when she saw the Hyuga heiress walk into the now crowded restaurant. She greeted everyone in the restaurant with a warm smile, before her eyes landed on Naruto. Great, now it's a party. She thought to herself before returning Hinata's greeting and turning her attention to her food when it was brought out. She dropped any act of kindness however when the Byakugan user began to speak to Naruto. Naruto-kun? I thought I might find you here. Do you have a second? There was something I wanted to talk to you about. If that's okay. Hinata blushed as she managed to get out the sentence. It's okay if now isn't a good time. Sakura's heart sank and she had to look away for fear that her emotions would get the better of her. Naruto didn't notice, but Sasuke did. He couldn't help a small grin form on his face. About damn time, he thought. Naruto couldn't believe his luck. Out of all the times Hinata could have chosen to ask for a private conversation, she had to pick today. Not to mention that with his feelings for Sakura being as strong as they were after last night, he didn't really know what he would do if she approached the subject he had been avoiding for a while. All he wanted to do was spend some time with his best friend. He sighed before resigning himself to fate and smiled back at her. Sure Hinata, let me just finish my. Before he could finish however, his eyes narrowed. Everything else happened so quickly. He shot Sasuke a glance as the Uchiha nodded his head. Sakura looked confused until she sensed the beginnings of Naruto infusing chakra. Before either of the 2 women could react, they both felt Naruto's arms around their waists. He spun to shield them, and they were suddenly engulfed in the bright yellow chakra of his 9 tails form. In the split second it had taken the chakra head of a fox to take shape around them. Sasuke covered it with his own Susanoo armor, but not before grabbing Old Man Tuchi and pulling him into the defensive shield behind Naruto. Not a moment later, the ramen shop exploded into a mass of white and blue fire. The sound was deafening as burning wood and metal slammed against the chakra that was protecting the group. It was so bright and so hot that even Sasuke had to shield his eyes for fear of being blinded. When the light cleared, Sakura looked around and the sight she saw almost brought her to tears. As Naruto's fox shield disappeared, she could get a clear view of what had happened. Everything within a 2-block radius of the ramen shop was decimated. It looked like the Pain invasion from before the war. People were screaming, buildings had collapsed, and the same blue and white fire engulfed their surroundings and was quickly spreading. She looked at Naruto's deadly serious expression, and at Sasuke's hand on his katana as she finally realized what was happening. They were under attack. Naruto looked on in horror as he listened to the screams and witnessed the chaos that was unfolding around him. His blood boiled with rage and he could feel Kurama's anger begin to flow through him. Someone was threatening the peace they had worked so hard for yet again, and he was tired of it. He ground his teeth together as his pupils flashed red for a brief second. He let out a low growl. Quickly he glanced towards Sakura. She was safe, he had acted in time. At the sight of her, his eyes returned to their usual ocean blue, and he could feel his anger dissipate slightly. He silently thanked God for his enhanced senses. If anything had happened to her, especially on his watch, he didn't know what he would do. The thought was both motivating and terrifying at the same time. He didn't have much time to think, however, as a blur of blue-green chakra landed in the middle of the group. Sasuke was the first to react, unsheathing his katana and swinging it at the intruder. The blue entity dodged it effortlessly before jumping up to knee Sasuke in the jaw. Before he could regain his footing, Sasuke received a powerful kick to his stomach, knocking him back over what remained of the ramen bar. The unknown assailant ducked to avoid one of Naruto's punches, before grabbing Hinata by the arm. In one swift motion, he knocked her out and lifted her over his shoulder. It happened so fast that she had no hope of keeping up. Just as quickly as the mystery figure had appeared, he jumped to the rooftops and made his getaway, carrying Hinata with him. "Hinata!" Naruto yelled in panic as he watched his friend get lifted away by the unknown man. He stopped himself before he blindly took off after her. Looking around at his surroundings again, he closed his eyes tight. The edges of his eyes became surrounded in a dark red color. Sakura instantly recognized his sage mode. When his eyes shot open, his usual blue was replaced again, but this time with bright yellow. 97. He said more to himself than anybody else. Sakura looked confused before he made a familiar hand seal, and 97 identical copies of the blonde hero flooded the now destroyed ramen shop and out onto the street. Sasuke recovered from the blow that landed on him and took a stand beside Sakura. Naruto turned around to face them. There are 97 people trapped. The explosion hit everything in a 2-block radius from here from what I can tell. I have to go after Hinata. Sakura, I'm leaving the injured to you. My clones can find everyone with Sage Mode. Just tell them what you need them to do and they'll do it. Sakura nodded. She knew it wasn't what she should be focused on, but she couldn't help but admire the man before her as his leadership qualities shone through. Sasuke, I need you to contain the fire, it's spreading way too fast. When you are done, help Sakura with whatever she needs. HMF, Sasuke nodded. He hated to take orders from his rival but also knew the village would be further damaged if he didn't follow the blonde's plan. He jumped into the air and summoned a large hawk that carried him to the outskirts of the fire. Naruto? Sakura got his attention, worry evident in her voice. Be careful. It took Naruto off guard, but he broke out his signature grin and gave her a thumbs up. Promise. If you need me, destroy one of my clones and I'll come running. I'm counting on you, Sakura, they all are. Just watch me, Sakura said, chakra beginning to flow her. Naruto smiled at her again, before jumping onto the roof and disappearing after Hinata. Sakura felt a pang in her chest watching him disappear, but shook her head and slapped herself on both cheeks before entering medic mode. She bit the end of her thumb and slammed her palm on the ground. Instantly, 100 identical slugs appeared, all awaiting Sakura's orders. She quickly ordered the slugs onto the clones' shoulders. She told them that Naruto's clones would take them to the injured. They were to use her chakra to heal anyone whose life wasn't in immediate danger. They would bring anyone who could be moved to the hospital and would report back anyone who needed her to treat them on site. The slugs instantly obeyed her, impressed by her calm and cool demeanor. They did as instructed, and in a flash of yellow and orange Naruto's clones fanned out to search for the injured. Sakura began to mold more chakra as she prepared for what would surely be an exhausting few hours. Naruto's feet pounded against the shingles as he jumped from roof to roof. He couldn't utilize Kurama's chakra mode and maintain control over his clones at the same time, so he was forced to remain in sage form. He was still plenty fast, however, and soon was only a few rooftops behind the mysterious kidnapper. Just as he was preparing to jump at him, a cloud of smoke appeared around him, revealing around 30 enemies. They were all identical, wrapped from head to toe in bandages and wearing a mask with an odd symbol over their faces. He could tell they were rather weak, probably either a clone or puppet, just you of some kind. As his foot connected with one of them, he figured the later to be true. The puppets tried to use their numbers to their advantage but were quickly outmatched. Naruto jumped over the head of one enemy before kicking 2 more with his outstretched legs. He landed on his hands and spun around, knocking out a few more with a helicopter kick. Before the next strike could come, he jumped to a higher vantage and faced the remaining group. Chakra began to condense in his palm, before spreading out in the shape of a giant shuriken. He threw his just you at the group and jumped to continue his pursuit. He didn't even look back as his Rasen shuriken expanded behind him, as he knew he had eliminated them all. Sasuke sensed a familiar chakra signature approaching, and he turned to see his Team 7 replacement and his former sensei fly up next to him. They mounted their own hawk, although this one was made of ink, not flesh. He welcomed the support. He had circled the flame-engulfed section of the village 3 times and was beginning to get frustrated. No matter how many times he converted the white flames into his black ones, they just kept coming. Basic water style was failing as well, and at this rate he knew the damage to the village would be catastrophic. "What's the situation?" Kakashi asked. He then explained that Sai had been in his office when the explosion happened, and they had rushed over as fast as they could. Sasuke recalled what had happened to the best of his abilities, and concluded with the issues he was having with stopping the spread of the flames. Sai nodded, and Kakashi looked down in terror at the scene before him. "Okay, we'll leave Hinata's rescue to Naruto. Sasuke, circle again, but this time focus on creating a barrier with your flames, don't attempt to put them out." Sasuke nodded at his old teacher, and a smirk appeared his lips. Kakashi may have lost a lot of his power after the war, but his battle instinct remained as sharp as ever. The Uchiha was a little shocked. He hadn't thought of the idea himself but ignored it as his hawk began its next lap around the disaster. Sai and Kakashi let out a breath they didn't realize they were holding when they saw the Uchiha's black flames form a giant circle extending high into the air around the burning segment of the village. The plan had worked for now, but things were far from over. Kakashi ordered Sai to return to Hokage Tower and help Shikamaru gather reinforcements, before jumping off of the hawk to aid in the rescue effort below. Sakura could feel the exhaustion hitting her. More than half of the victims caught in the attack were stable and en route to the hospital for treatment. The people who remained, however, were in far greater danger. She had set up a makeshift treatment area in front of the demolished Ichiraku, and was currently healing a particularly bad burn on a man Naruto's clone had brought to her. Kastuyu, her slug, had divided herself further and was channeling Sakura's chakra into 3 villagers who laid still a few feet behind her. She was trying her best to push through, but the emotions of the situation were beginning to take their toll. 2 people had already died, and she knew that she wouldn't be able to save everyone that remained. Tears formed in her eyes and she pumped more chakra into the burn victim in front of her. Despite her feelings, she had to keep going. Getting distracted only meant a higher body count, and she had far too much experience to make that mistake now. Naruto's words echoed in her head, and her mouth pulled into a small smile when his grinning face popped into her mind. Her resolve steeled even further, and dark black lines began to expand out of the purple diamond on her forehead. An insane amount of chakra flowed to every part of her body, and she felt her energy return. "I'm counting on you. They all are," she whispered to herself, and she sent more chakra to her patient, until she felt him stir slightly and open his eyes for the first time. Her satisfaction was short-lived, as 2 more of Naruto's clones landed beside her with 2 more injured villagers. Hinata's kidnapper slammed into the ground with such force that it splintered and cracked underneath him. He rolled out of the way just in time to avoid an angry Naruto's Rasengan. Said Naruto disappeared in a puff of smoke as the real Naruto landed several yards behind him, carrying an unconscious Hinata in his arms. "Who the hell are you?" Naruto screamed. His determination and anger were momentarily replaced with shock when he finally got a look at his enemy. The teal chakra form before him slowly faded away, and in its place stood a man. He had snow-white skin and matching hair. He was about as tall as Naruto but significantly skinnier. His outfit consisted of a beige toga over his white kimono. 6 tomo tattoos adorned his neck, and Naruto shivered as he focused on the man's chakra for the first time. It reminded him of Sasuke's when he had been at his darkest point, but this man's anger seemed to run even deeper. He also noticed that the man was wearing a blindfold across his eyes. "Wait, don't tell me he fought me this whole time with that on," he thought, before the man's shrill, deep voice broke him out of his trance. "You had to let her go eventually." That was all the man said before a pillar of blinding blue light erupted beneath him. Naruto had to shield his eyes, and when he opened them the mysterious entity had vanished, leaving only scorched earth where he once stood. He looked down at the unconscious woman in his arms. She looked unharmed, but he had to get her to the hospital before rejoining his team. He took a deep breath before jumping back onto the rooftops and towards the hospital. He looked towards the direction of the original attack and saw Sasuke's black flames shoot into the sky and form what looked like a giant barrier. He felt a bit of relief wash over him. He knew he had the most capable shinobi team imaginable, but that didn't stop him from worrying about them. Especially about a certain pink-haired woman who he desperately hoped was okay. It was well past midnight when Sakura finally left Konoha Hospital. She was utterly defeated, and felt like she could pass out at any moment. She had drastically underestimated how many people needed intensive treatment, and had spent the last 7 hours since the attack jumping between surgeries with no breaks in between. In addition, many of the victims were trapped under a powerful genjutsu. Many had to be sedated before she could properly operate. She was running on soldier pills and willpower, and could feel that both were about to run out. She hadn't seen her team since the attack, but Shizune kept her updated in between surgeries. Naruto had successfully managed to rescue Hinata, and she was currently resting at her clan's compound. Sasuke and Kakashi had sealed off the flames, but much to her surprise they couldn't put them out. The result was the total destruction of the area as they had no choice but to let the flames burn out on their own, taking the buildings with them. The entire radius around Ichiraku's was totally flat, and while the flames had mostly gone out by now there was still a pillar of smoke extending into the air. It had been a devastating blow to the Leaf Village. After taking a few more steps she felt her legs give way. Even though she knew she was falling, she couldn't find the strength to move. Her body didn't listen to her and her vision blurred as she prepared herself for the hard fall that was to come. It never came. Instead, she felt a strong arm wrap around her shoulder. Her head gently fell into the soft crook of a person's neck. Startled, she took a deep breath in and recognized the scent instantly. She knew she should protest, but she didn't. She knew that she should say something, but she couldn't. She knew she shouldn't be happy it was him, but she was. Her eyes flickered open and saw the most intense and beautiful sapphire eyes staring down at her. They were full of concern, relief, and something she couldn't place, but didn't have the energy to dwell on. Naruto didn't say anything. He had seen the girl before him at her worst, but it had been a long time since she had looked this beaten. Any thoughts of the day's tragic events were pushed from his mind. They would have time to discuss it later. Right now all he knew was that she needed him, and he wasn't about to disappoint. "Naruto, what are you?" Sakura didn't have time to finish before he spun around and let her fall onto his back before he locked her legs around his waist. Her arms automatically found his neck, and she clung on as tight as she could. His hair was disheveled and his clothes were covered in dirt. "He's probably had just as long a day as I have," she thought to herself, as Naruto jumped to the rooftops of a nearby shop. "Can I take you home?" He looked back over his shoulder and softly smiled in her direction. She closed her eyes and rested her chin over his shoulder. She knew he was talking about his home, and she didn't have the strength to protest. She didn't want to be alone right now, and more importantly she didn't want to be without him. Ino's words echoed in her head again, but the fatigue served as a lovely barrier for any embarrassment or anxiety. She nodded her head against his neck and felt the wind blow against them as he made his way back to his apartment. He gracefully landed in front of his door and bent down to let the girl on his back regain her footing. Sakura had managed to get a little strength back on their brief trip and was able to stand on her own, even if she shook slightly. He unlocked his door and held it open, allowing her to enter first. The first thing she noticed when she stepped into his apartment was how much cleaner it was than the last time she had stayed over. In the 2 weeks she hadn't been there, Naruto must have given the place a full scrub down. Even the floors shined in a way she wasn't used to. His shoes were neatly tucked by the door. The dishes were all put away, and she even noticed he had thrown out the empty ramen cups that usually littered the small kitchen table. Someone knows how to clean up. Sakura turned to face her friend, but her breath hitched in her throat when she saw his normal smile replaced with a stern, serious expression. He took a step closer to her. How many? She broke eye contact with him, suddenly feeling herself come undone. She looked down at the floor. Naruto, how many? He asked again. There was no anger in his voice, but it was clear he wasn't going to drop the subject until she answered him. She finally looked back at him. 13, she said softly. Let it out. That was all she needed to hear. The tears came on so quick and so hard that she immediately felt lightheaded. The events of the day replayed in her mind at a lightning fast pace, and she began to hyperventilate in order to get enough oxygen. How was he able to tell so easily all the weight she was carrying? When did she come to rely on him to this extent? She tried to hide her face in her arm, but soon felt Naruto's hand softly wrap around her wrist. He pulled her against his chest, one hand nestling in her tangled pink hair, and the other one finding its way to her back. Electricity shot through her system and he gently led her head to his neck. A fresh round of tears escaped her eyes and she let out a wail into his shoulder. She hated herself at that moment for being so weak but had no way of fighting back. She cried against him for what felt like ages. The entire time, he said nothing. He didn't need to. Nothing he could say could compare to just letting her release. He had been around her long enough to know that losing a patient was not something words could fix. So he let her cry. Despite the situation and her distress, Naruto couldn't help himself from gently taking in the smell of her hair. She didn't exactly smell great, but he couldn't care less. It was her, and that was all that mattered. Eventually, Sakura's crying died down, and the two were left holding on to each other in Naruto's hallway. It suddenly dawned on Sakura just how close they were, and a blush immediately plastered itself on her face. She gently pulled away from him, and noticed what she thought was a small disappointed groan come from behind his lips. She convinced herself it was her imagination. There was no way she could get a reaction like that from Naruto. Ino's words were having more of an effect on her than she thought. Naruto, is it okay if I take a shower? Her blush intensified as she remembered one small problem. And, maybe borrow something to sleep in? I don't think I left anything here. She looked away from him yet again, missing the small blush that crept onto his cheeks. Sure thing, Sakura-chan. I'll leave it by the door. I hope Orange is okay. She laughed and he felt some joy return to his world from just the sound of it. Idiot, pink clashes with orange, you know? He pouted at her, which got another laugh, before she headed down the hall to the bathroom. He quickly went to his bedroom, and pulled out an old white shirt and a pair of orange boxers. He folded them neatly and went to leave them outside the bathroom. His body froze when he heard the water turn on, and it suddenly hit him. She had stayed the night many times before, but she had never actually showered there. She always either did it at work, or not at all. It shouldn't have been a big deal, but the thought of a naked Sakura behind the door in front of him was enough to send his mind into a tailspin of less than innocent thoughts. He shook himself out of his stupor and returned to his room. Quickly, he changed into a black t-shirt and orange boxers, and threw his dirty clothing into a hamper in his closet. His bed made a loud squeaking sound when he flopped down onto his back. He began citing ninja history in his head to distract himself from thinking back to a showering Sakura. It seemed to be working, until his door creaked open and the object of his fantasies quietly walked into his room. He had to stop himself from choking on his own saliva. Not that any existed at that moment. His mouth was as dry as it could possibly be. She avoided his gaze and he saw a small blush appear on his cheeks. She finally looked up at him and gave him a smile that turned his mind into a puddle. Her hair was wet, and tied back behind her head, and she was wearing the outfit he had laid out for her. She was actually wearing it. Sakura on the other hand was just as charged as he was. She had looked in the mirror on her way out of the bathroom. His shirt was too big for her. It slid down just enough to see the slight trace of her collarbone. She hated that she loved seeing herself in his signature color, and hated even more how comfortable she felt in his clothing. When she locked eyes with him, she had to force herself from not jumping him, just to feel his warmth on her skin again. Instead, she quietly sat on the edge of the bed, and he pushed himself up so that he was sitting next to her. Neither of them said anything for a long time until Naruto's voice pierced the silence. I told you orange would look good on you. He gave her a shy smile and she just chuckled at him. Idiot, she said, before the exhaustion from the day came crashing over her. Naruto noticed and shot up as she found her way under the covers. He smiled down at her again, before making his way towards the door of his room. Something inside Sakura panicked, and she shouted out, a little louder than she meant to. Where are you going? She asked, and Naruto froze in his tracks. Well, you're up kinda in my bed, Sakura-chan, so I'm gonna go set up the couch. He responded before he noticed Sakura look away and a small blush appear for the 1000th time that night. Why does she keep doing that? I hope she isn't sick, he thought to himself before continuing on. A small thought popped into his mind. Is that okay? He asked quietly. It was wishful thinking, and he was sure it was just their conversation the night before that had him being optimistic. Yet, he desperately wished she would say no. Which is why the next thing he heard nearly made his eyes bulge out of his head. No, I mean yay. I mean, you've had a long day too. You shouldn't have to sleep on the couch. Not that I want to either, I mean. What I'm trying to say is. She was so embarrassed she couldn't find the strength to observe his reaction at the next thing she said. We can share the bed, if you want. She heard Naruto take a sharp breath in, and immediately went to backtrack on her words. But if you try anything, I swear to God, Naruto, I will knock you all the way to Suna. His laughter brought her back to reality and she smiled softly when he walked back to his bed. She made room for him and she slid to the other side. It was a twin bed, so she knew it would be a tight fit, but wanted to at least appear to be staying on her own side. Naruto didn't seem to notice, however, and took up far more room than his side allowed. I would argue, but a bed sounds really nice right now. No funny business. I promise. Naruto smirked at her and she felt a shiver run down her spine. He reached over and turned off the light, and Sakura felt him shift as he got under the blanket. She turned to face the wall so her back was towards him. A soft sigh escaped her mouth as her head hit the pillow. Every cell in Naruto's body felt like it was vibrating. He had turned the lights out because he knew if Sakura saw the look on his face he was a dead man. He turned his back to her and tried desperately to keep still. If he moved even a little he risked brushing up against her, and the mere thought of feeling her skin was enough to give him goosebumps. He had known since Sasuke had returned that he wasn't over her, but it was in that moment that he realized just how deep his feelings ran. All of a sudden he felt a weight on his shoulder. Looking down, he was greeted to the sight of a mess of pink hair resting itself on his chest. She was frozen, and he could tell she was holding in her breath. He had no idea what to do. A few days ago he had been ignoring her and prepared to let her go. Now, he would have killed anyone and anything that dared interrupt his moment of bliss. I'm sorry. I just don't want to be alone tonight. You can push me away if you want. Sakura didn't move, and was thankful her hair was covering her face considering they were currently the exact same color. She didn't know what had come over her. That seemed to be happening a lot around him recently, she thought to herself. When he didn't say anything, she prepared to move back to her side of the bed, until his arm shot out and she was pulled even closer to him. He wrapped her in his embrace and repositioned them so that they were less awkward and more comfortable. I never want to be alone, I get it. She looked up for the first time and saw him giving her his signature toothy grin, and she couldn't stop herself from smiling back at him. She decided she would cut herself some slack tonight. It had been an awful day for both of them, and she would deal with any repercussions in the morning. Tonight, they were finding comfort in each other, and that was enough. Her head rested on his chest as she listened to his heartbeat. It was incredibly soothing to her, and before long Sakura fell asleep. Naruto noticed as her breath steadied before letting out a breath of his own that he was holding in. He didn't know what to think. Sakura had never acted like this around him, even when she had lost patience in the past. Just like her, tonight he didn't care. He fell asleep with a smile on his face, his favorite pink-haired companion tucked beneath his arm. The angry battle cry was heard throughout all of Konoha. People turned their heads up and birds flew away from nesting in the trees. If anyone else were in the room, all they would have seen was a flash of tan skin and orange fabric fly across the room at an inhumane speed before slamming into the door. The force of the blow was enough to knock it off its hinges, and the poor blonde war hero tumbled out of his room before landing upside down against the wall of his hallway. The sound of bones cracking echoed throughout, and he slowly slid down, leaving a Naruto-sized indentation in his wake. -10 minutes earlier, the sound of rain falling on the wooden roof echoed throughout the small apartment. Ever so slowly, Sakura Haruno began to stir from her slumber. She wasn't usually one to sleep in, but this morning she had no desire to move. She hadn't slept this well in a long time and wasn't ready for it to be over yet. Jade eyes remained closed as her body eventually tried to bring itself upright. It was surprised, however, to find that a strong grip was holding it down. She felt so content that she decided to ignore her instinct and return to the sweet embrace of sleep. That is until she remembered where she was and, more importantly, who she was with. Her eyes shot open and she had to force herself not to squeak when she saw the position she was in. Naruto, her best friend, was sound asleep next to her. His bandaged arm was draped between her neck and the pillow, and his face was buried in her pink hair. She could feel his hot breath against her forehead every time he exhaled. Sakura's leg was draped over his waist, and her arm had found its way around his collarbone. Her head was resting against his chest. She could feel her heartbeat speeding up. It took all of her willpower not to jump out of bed and get as far away as possible. Closing her eyes tight, she had to take in a few deep breaths of her own to calm herself. When she did, she again noticed the rhythm of his heart beating against her ear. It was steady, and it was calming. She sighed, and unconsciously inched her head even closer to him. She opened her eyes, albeit slower and more composed this time, and her own heart skipped a beat when she tilted her head and looked up at his face. It wasn't the first time that they had slept in close quarters. As teammates, they had seen each other sleep thousands of times. Even more so since she had begun crashing at his place on some work nights. Naruto liked to sleep in when he could, and would often still be resting on the couch when she left. This time was different. They had never, in all their years as Team 7 or in all their years of friendship, been this close. For the first time, Sakura found herself admiring him. Gone was the small and childlike physique of his genin days. What replaced it was the body of a young man, plain and simple. She had never noticed how prominent his jawline had become, or the smooth contour which replaced the layer of baby fat that used to coat his cheeks. Obviously he had gotten taller, but it startled her just how small she felt in his arms. He had really matured into a fine physical specimen, and she felt herself blush when she realized the small pool of heat that was forming in her stomach. It wasn't anxiety, but something more. Something carnal. "You love Naruto," her best friend's words repeated yet again in her head, and a small frown appeared on her lips. She didn't want to think about it. Loving him was wrong, she was sure of it, but at the same time something about where they were felt so right, so natural. Just existing with him was so easy, and the pink-haired medic was smart enough to know that the butterflies in her stomach and the days she entered whenever he was around recently were only proving her friend's point. The image of Hinata suddenly flashed in her mind. What did she need to tell him, she thought to herself. She closed her eyes again and had to stop tears from falling onto her teammate. "What do you think, you idiot?" She wanted to tell him she loves him. That she always has. She wants to be with him. And you know she's good for him. She deserves Naruto, not you. Sakura's frown deepened. It wasn't like she was very close to Hinata, but she didn't want to hurt the girl. Everyone in the village could see the feelings the Hyuga had towards Naruto. Yet, her mind wandered back to her conversation with Ino. She did make a fair point. Hinata had made her feelings clear to him in that past, although it had been in the heat of battle. Still, she thought, Naruto should know about Hinata's admiration by now. Yet he hadn't acted on it. It was never something Sakura had thought about before, but now she found the curiosity all-consuming. Doubt filled her mind. Was there someone else he had his eye on? If she actually thought about it, she and Naruto had never discussed their love lives. It was partly why she had taken so long to tell him about Sasuke. It wasn't that the other one would get mad, but more of an unspoken rule that the two shared. It didn't hurt that in the past 2 years there hadn't been much to report on either of their ends. You could just ask him. The thought of it felt like shards of glass piercing her heart. No way in hell was she going to do that. She had embarrassed herself enough the past few days and didn't want to do anything that could tip the blonde off to her newly discovered feelings. It wouldn't be fair to him. After everything she had put him through, it just couldn't be. She sighed and closed her eyes. As much as it annoyed her, nothing was going to get figured out in that moment. Hopefully answers would come in time, and for now that would have to be enough. Yet, even after finding her resolve, she couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt that it was her, not Hinata, that was currently cuddled up and leaning on his bare naked chest. Wait, naked chest? Sakura's eyes widened and she looked down to realize that her cheek was pressed up against the muscle of Naruto's pectoral. She didn't even notice before, being so distracted by her inner monologue, but at some point during the night he must have taken his shirt off. Now any barrier between his skin and hers was gone. The medic's cheeks turned as pink as her hair and her heart threatened to jump out of her throat. Without thinking, a scream escaped the pinkette's mouth and a chakra-coated fist slammed into the slumbering Naruto's stomach. Present time. What the hell? He screamed, now fully awake. Naruto had been enjoying a lovely dream about getting to share a bed with his favorite companion when he had been rudely awakened by being launched out of his room. He rubbed his eyes to try and get a better handle on his surroundings. His head was killing him, and he felt like he might throw up from the pain in his stomach. Slowly, he rose to his feet, using the wall for support, and used his free hand to rub his very likely broken rib. He turned towards his bedroom and saw one Sakura Haruno, steam coming out of her ears, fist held in front of her face, fire burning in her jade eyes. She looked ready to kill. The man's eyes shot open. So it wasn't a dream. All the things that happened last night were real. She really had slept in his bed, next to him, all night. The mere realization of it was enough to send a jolt of pleasure down his spine. Said pleasure, however, was quickly replaced with pain when he again felt where her blow had connected. What the hell was that for? He yelled again. In their years of friendship he had gotten used to her beatings, knowing that he generally deserved them. Contrary to popular belief, however, he was more than capable of standing up to his friend when he felt she was in the wrong. You promised you wouldn't try anything, I trusted you," she spat at him, before pushing the blanket off of her and standing up. A bead of sweat dripped from his forehead as she began to approach him. Confused and fearing for his life, he automatically began to back up down the hallway. "Sakura-chan, calm down, what are you talking about?" As he stumbled back he lost his footing and landed on his butt with a loud thud. That didn't stop the angry medic Nin from continuing her approach. "Where the hell is your shirt, Uzumaki?" Naruto frowned and for the first time realized that he was holding his bare stomach. He looked down to confirm his suspicions and winced when he saw skin where fabric should be. He immediately shot up his hands in defense. Sakura-chan, I swear I didn't try anything. I'm not used to sleeping with someone. I must have taken it off in my sleep. I'm sorry. It was an honest mistake. Having Kurama sealed inside me makes my body temperature hotter than normal, you know this." He covered his head with his hands and braced for another hit, but it never came. After a few seconds he finally looked up, and silently thanked God when he saw the telltale signs of her legendary temper receding. After a few seconds of silence, Sakura let out a sigh and offered her hand to him to lift him upright. "Okay." She turned her head and avoided his gaze, suddenly being very fascinated with the flooring of his hallway. "What the hell are you doing? Kick the pervert's ass already," she heard her inner self yell, but she realized that the more she thought about it, the less she wanted to. It was not his intention to offend her. Naruto would never try anything on her, even if he wanted to, which as far as she was concerned was still a very open subject to debate. Still, it surprised her. In the past, logic wouldn't have played a factor in the execution of the prisoner before her, but now she found herself wanting to give him the benefit of the doubt. "Okay?" His voice broke her out of her thoughts as he looked up at her confused. She frowned at the lingering fear in his eyes. "I'm sorry I overreacted," she said. "I know you wouldn't try anything. It just took me by surprise is all. I'm also not used to sharing a bed with someone." His eyes widened, but his confused expression hurt her, and he still hadn't accepted her outstretched hand. "Am I that scary?" she said, more to herself than Naruto. She blushed when she realized it had been said aloud. Naruto finally took her hand and stood up. "Well, you did just break my door, and I think also my ribs." He grinned at her for the first time that morning, instantly brightening her mood. "But I could be persuaded to forgive you if you do something about this goddamn pain." Sakura giggled as relief washed over her. She turned to walk back towards his room. The thought of him actually being mad at her was much more disturbing than it had been in the past, and she didn't like the thought of it one bit. In one swift movement she knocked his discarded shirt into the air with her foot and caught it before throwing it in his direction. "Put a shirt on first, idiot, then we'll talk." Glancing back at him, she could have sworn she saw a dejected look on his face. Yet as soon as she noticed it, the look vanished and she convinced herself it was just her imagination. He was about to comply when the doorbell rang. Naruto gave Sakura a quick shrug before going to answer. She was about to protest that he still hadn't put a shirt on, but got distracted by the muscles of his back clenching as he walked away. "Get a hold of yourself, woman. He's supposed to be the pervert, not you," she thought to herself before shaking her head. She quickly went into the bathroom and splashed some cold water on her face as punishment. Shikamaru Nara tapped his foot impatiently while he waited for his blonde friend to answer the door. It was raining, and too early in the morning for this. His patience was wearing thin. He was about to knock again when he heard a few curse words muttered from the other side of the door, followed by things falling over and more curse words. Finally, the doorknob shook before Naruto swung the door open. "Shikamaru, what are you doing here?" the blonde asked, still rubbing some sleep out of his eyes. He shivered when he felt the cold air hit his chest. "Looks like you have a fun night." Naruto winced and the Nara genius scoffed and had to stifle a laugh when he saw his blonde friend's current state. He was half naked, his usually spiked hair was matted down on his head, clearly disheveled from a night of sleep. Shikamaru noticed a large bruise on Naruto's ribcage but decided to ignore it. It was too much of a drag, he thought to himself. "Lord Sixth has summoned us." Naruto's eyes immediately turned from sleepy to laser-focused as he continued on. "We have a mission. It's about yesterday's attack. Urgent. I'll let Kakashi fill you in when we get there." Naruto sighed. He knew that Shikamaru already knew what the mission was, as he had probably been up all night planning it. Still, he understood protocol dictated the Hokage be the one to assign it. "Give me a sec, I'll get my stuff," Naruto said, turning his back on his friend and retreating back to his apartment. "And hurry up. We have to stop and pick Sakura up on the way." Shikamaru noticed the blonde man freeze and watched as he slowly turned around with a sheepish expression on his face. He also clocked the small tinge of blush that now dusted his friend's face. He raised an eyebrow before Naruto began to speak. Actually that won't be a pro." "Naruto? Who's at the door?" Sakura appeared in the entranceway, cutting him off. She had washed her face and let her hair down so it now messily framed her features. She was still wearing Naruto's t-shirt and boxers. Shikamaru mouthed a silent, "Oh," before looking at Naruto, then back to Sakura, then back to Naruto's newly formed bruise on his ribs. A giant grin spread across his face. Sakura blushed and immediately covered herself up, despite being already clothed. "Wait, no, no. This isn't what it looked like," she screamed out. Naruto was still blushing, but couldn't stop a small laugh from escaping when he saw his best friend so flustered. "Wrong move." Sakura grabbed his ear and pulled hard, causing him to yelp in pain. "And what the hell are you finding so funny?" she hissed, pulling on his ear harder. Shikamaru just smiled as he watched the scene unfold in front of him. It wasn't how he expected his morning to go, but he was never one to turn down entertainment. "I'll let you two lovebirds get ready," he said slyly and watched as both ninja became even more flustered than they were before. Sakura was about to launch a punch in his direction, but the Nara quickly waved goodbye and descended towards the street below in a very Kakashi-like manner. Looking up from the street, he could see Sakura chastising Naruto, and the blonde rubbing the back of his neck and apologizing. Despite the situation, Naruto really looked quite happy. He sighed to himself as he waited for his teammates. Those two are both too troublesome, he thought. Sakura was the last one to enter the Hokage's office. After the embarrassing visit from Shikamaru, she had to go home and get clean clothing since the previous day's ensemble was still dirty. Naruto had offered to wait for her, much to Shikamaru's satisfaction, but she insisted she would be along shortly. Not to mention a few minutes alone and away from the subject of her turmoil were very much welcomed. Upon entering the room, she saw Naruto, Hinata, Shikamaru, and Sasuke all standing in a line in front of the Hokage's desk. Kakashi was seated in his chair, and she noticed another woman standing beside him. The newcomer had dark brown skin, with white hair tied up above her head. Her outfit was a standard New Age Jonin uniform, but her headband insignia was that of shinobi, rather than leaf. She was the village's liaison to the United Shinobi Alliance, and Sakura had seen her a few times before. She received a friendly smile from the girl and returned it. She went to take her place next to Sasuke. The Uchiha nodded in her direction. He quickly glanced her up and down, which she thought was odd until he spoke up. "You look rested." She forced a blush from staying off her face. Had Shikamaru told the whole room? No, he wouldn't do that, and also even if he wanted to he wouldn't have had time since their arrival, she reasoned. She smiled black at Sasuke. "Thanks, I slept well." She turned her attention back to Kakashi when he cleared his throat, and failed to notice the small smile that a certain blonde was now sporting. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice, especially after the events of yesterday." Kakashi began to speak, and all the shinobi in the room focused up and faced him. "The mission I am assigning you is directly related to said events. There is a lot I have to say, so I ask you to listen to it all before asking questions. Okay?" Naruto remained oblivious while every person in the room shot him a look. Kakashi sighed and continued on. "Right, well, as you're well aware, yesterday afternoon the village was attacked. They were able to slip past our detection barrier, and 2 whole blocks were completely wiped out. However, thanks to the quick thinking of our shinobi, there were minimal casualties, and no ninja died. That being said, 13 civilians lost their lives yesterday. All in all, not a good result." Naruto slyly shot his pink-haired friend a look, just to make sure she was okay. He was not surprised when she stood tall, not at all fazed by the recap of yesterday's events. I should have known better, he thought. Sakura was the most caring person he knew, but also a shinobi. She was more than capable of handling herself, although that didn't stop him from worrying. Some good news is that we have identified the culprit of the attack. It was not by another ninja village, meaning the peace between us is not threatened. The enemy is acting on their own. Kakashi nodded towards the woman standing beside him. Megumi here will relay this mission to the other villages, just to be safe. Anyway, thanks to one of the enemies Naruto was able to immobilize, we were able to figure out who is behind this. His name is Toneri. Based on his appearance and raw power, we believe him to be related to the Otsutsuki clan. But Kakashi-sensei, the things that attacked me were just puppets? How did you learn anything from them? Naruto interrupted. Sasuke groaned and Sakura hit her head to her forehead. They thought that Kakashi's warning would have been enough to keep his curiosity at bay a little longer. They were mistaken. Kakashi paused and rubbed his hands against his temples before continuing on. That's what we thought originally too, and while not entirely false, the reality is grimmer. Every one of those puppets is actually a person. Or what's left of one. Using some justu, Toneri has taken over their minds. Overridden them would be a better description. They are kept alive, but just barely, and their brains no longer fully function. They cannot talk or feel emotions, and they don't have any memories of their previous lives. They are more or less husks that followed Toneri's every command. Quote, Naruto's fist clenched at his side. He just couldn't understand it. No matter how many evil people he met, he would never wrap his head around how a person could do that to another. He was about to say something, but it was Sasuke who asked the next question. So why attack the leaf? He asked in his usual to-the-point manner. Hinata, we believe that Toneri might be related to Hamura, the brother of the Sage of Six Paths. It would stand to reason that he needs a Hyuga for something. Kakashi paused before continuing on to the next part. And that is why, when he failed in taking Hinata, he instead kidnapped her sister, Hanabi. Sasuke's eyes widened. Sakura put her hand over her mouth to cover a gasp, and Naruto immediately cried out in shock before Hinata placed a hand on his back, trying her best to calm him down. Shikamaru had already learned this information but was affected nonetheless hearing it in such terms. Unfortunately, we don't know his true motive. A team of Anbu were able to track him to a cave on the outskirts of the Land of Fire, but he disappeared inside. Sasuke, we are hoping your Rinnegan or Hinata's Byakugan can provide more answers. Kakashi cleared his throat and stood up. Your mission is to go to this cave, find Toneri, rescue Hanabi, and stop whatever he is planning. You will work as a 5-man team. We don't know how much time we have, so you leave in 2 hours. I am genuinely sorry to put this on you, but you are the only people I trust with this. A silence filled the room before each ninja nodded at their leader. If there are no questions, you are dismissed. The newly formed team ushered out of the office to gather any supplies they would need for their mission, but before the blonde could follow suit, he heard his sensei call to him. Naruto, a quick word please.